The story begins with a sword introducing itself. It states that it was reincarnated as a sword. Over a long period spanning hundreds of years, it met various masters. It turned those masters into heroes who would go down in history. Then it met its close friend, a boy born in a nameless rural village called Leonberg. Together, they roamed the world. They built achievements that no one could ever match. The scene then shifts to the present. The main character is seen slaughtering monsters using that very sword. Suddenly, a giant dragon appears. A purple aura pours out from the dragon's mouth. The main character smiles. He charges forward and leaps into the air. In a single motion, the dragon's head is severed. As the scene fades, the sword speaks again. It narrates that, after defeating the white dragon of the Frost Mountains, its friend finally became the ruler of a nation. Along with that moment, the legend of the Dragon Slayer was born. Time passes. The next scene reveals the sword resting inside a royal palace. Loud noises echo around it. The source of the noise is revealed to be a fat prince throwing a tantrum. The prince loudly claims the sword as his new possession and demands respect. The knights immediately intervene and urge the prince not to touch the sword. Enraged, the prince declares that there is no authority in the palace that can stop him from touching it. Inside its thoughts, the sword mocks the prince, questioning what kind of pig he is. It decides to check the prince's authority. A system window appears. The information reveals the prince's identity as Adrian Leonberg, male, 16 years old. His aptitude is listed as none. His traits are displayed one by one. The sword realizes that Leonberg is indeed its friend's descendant. However, it cannot believe that a descendant of the Sword Saint possesses such abysmal aptitude. The prince struggles heavily to lift the sword. He declares that with this sword, neither the king nor the nobles will be able to oppose him. He demands power from the great Dragon Slayer. Inside its thoughts, the sword questions why it should ever grant power to someone like him. The knights attempt to calm the prince down. Instead, the prince turns violent. He threatens everyone around him and declares that anyone who dares order him around deserves death. In the next instant, his foot slips. The sword pierces straight into his own chest. Everyone gasps in shock. The knights immediately rush to call the royal physician. The sword judges that someone who stabs himself with his own weapon is nothing but a scoundrel. Suddenly, its vision begins to blur. For the first time in its existence as a sword, it feels as though it is about to faint. The sword realizes that if Prince Adrian succeeds the throne, the kingdom has no future. It describes the prince as someone who inherited none of the royal family's natural gifts, yet ranks first in arrogance, a person with no ability, yet the greatest greed in the kingdom, a stupid, lazy, and violent pig. That was the first prince, Adrian Leonberg, an existence like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over the kingdom's future. After the incident, strange rumors begin to spread. People whisper that the prince was stabbed by a sword, hovered between life and death, and then woke up. The scene shifts to the palace corridors. Several maids are seen gossiping among themselves. They discuss how Prince Adrian seems to have changed recently. They note that he no longer flips dining tables in rage. They also notice that he has not summoned his group of delinquent followers. The maids laugh among themselves. They comment that even the mighty first prince must have learned shame. They speculate that he might simply be lying low out of fear. They believe that given enough time, he will return to his old ways. As this chatter fades, the sword resumes its narration. It explains that the person in question, Prince Adrian, has zero interest in such floating rumors. It then reveals the truth. In the process, it killed its friend's descendant and took over his body. The scene confirms that the sword's soul has now entered Adrian's body. Inside the room, maids inform Adrian that the doctor has arrived. Adrian reacts with irritation, complaining that the doctor did not come when he was dying. Soon after, Adrian's master enters the room. However, the being inside the body is no longer the real Adrian, but the sword itself. Because of this, the sword fails to recognize the man. It claims to have lost its memory and asks who the man is. The master is left in complete shock. At that moment, an announcement echoes through the palace. The king has arrived. Inside his thoughts, Adrian reacts with hostility, referring to the king as that bastard's father. When he finally sees the king's appearance, his perception shifts. He notes that the king looks far better than expected. He reflects that he once believed time would dilute the lion's blood into that of a dog. However, upon seeing the king, he realizes that this is clearly not the case. The king looked at Adrian with clear arrogance and remarked that Adrian did not even greet his own father. He concluded that surviving a brush with death does not necessarily change a person. Standing beside them, Adrian's master calmly informed the king that he had just learned the prince's memory was currently not intact. Hearing this, a knight panicked and exclaimed in shock that such a tragedy had occurred. He expressed disbelief that the royal physician had failed to report such a critical matter to the king, and demanded that the physician be summoned immediately to examine the prince's body. Soon after, the physician examined Adrian and reported that there were no physical abnormalities within his body, but it was possible that he had suffered temporary memory loss. At that moment, the sword entity residing within Adrian's body reflected inwardly, wondering if this situation meant he had been discovered. The physician then coldly remarked that the situation was truly convenient, implying that claiming to have no memory did not erase the actions Adrian had committed until now. Hearing this, Adrian became visibly shaken. The king then spoke again, stating that sometimes people make the wrong choices and commit actions condemned by everyone. He acknowledged that if someone later realizes their mistakes and never repeats them, it can be considered growth and learning. However, he emphasized that Adrian had forgotten everything, making it as though nothing had ever happened. Because of that, Adrian had not taken a single step forward from his past and would be unable to move forward in the future either. Adrian's master stepped in once more and asked the king to calm himself. Inside, Adrian cursed his situation, realizing he had stepped into serious trouble. He feared that he would not even be treated as a human anymore, let alone as a prince. Confused and distressed, he wondered what kind of actions this body's previous owner had committed. At that moment, Adrian's mother rushed in and embraced him tightly while crying. She said she had heard everything and understood how confused he must be. She reassured him that his memory would return soon and stated that the past was trivial and not remembering it should not be such a serious issue. She tearfully noted how gaunt his once lovely face had become and expressed happiness that he had finally opened his eyes. She warned him never to touch such a dangerous object again and said she could not imagine what would have happened if he had not woken up. Adrian grew even more troubled internally and apologized silently, acknowledging that her real son was dead and that he now occupied Adrian's body. Afterward, his mother left and instructed him to rest. Left alone, Adrian became frustrated and reflected on his past. He remembered how a close friend had earnestly asked him to look after his descendants, yet he had ended up killing one of them. He admitted that it was not intentional, but regardless, he was the one who cut that life short. Accepting the reality of the situation, he resolved to live a good life, both for himself and for the dead boy. He recalled that he had once been reincarnated as a sword and spent his entire life cleaning up after others. He concluded that it did not matter that this body was fat and lacked talent. What mattered was rebuilding his power. He reminded himself that he had raised countless children before and knew what to do. He decided that the first step was to refine a mana heart. With that resolve, Adrian opened his mouth and attempted to scatter mana throughout his body. However, the body could not accept it. He tried again and again, but each attempt ended in failure. Finally, overwhelmed with anger, he collapsed to the ground and cursed the body for being completely useless. Adrian reflects that with a constitution like his, he would normally force the mana inside by sheer power. At that moment, a maid arrives, carrying a tonic sent by the queen. She hesitates, clearly frightened, worried that he might throw it at her. Adrian considers the tonic and realizes that drinking it might help stabilize his mana. He consumes the entire tonic in one go and then dismisses the maid, telling her to leave. Once alone again, Adrian attempts to scatter the mana throughout his body. A vibrant blue aura bursts out from him, filled with energy. He realizes that the tonic has worked, but the effect is still insufficient. The amount of mana is too small, and it will completely scatter after just a single day. Unsatisfied, Adrian orders the maid to bring him more tonic. Several days pass, and at last, Adrian reaches the point where he can form a mana heart. He feels confident, believing this is something he has done countless times before. Creating a mana heart feels so familiar that he is certain he could do it even with his eyes closed. However, something goes wrong. A sharp pain surges through his chest, and his heart feels as though it is about to explode. He realizes that if he loses consciousness now, the mana will flow backward and destroy him. He forces himself to remain calm and focuses on seizing the mass of mana that is running wild inside his body. There is no need to rush. He guides the mana carefully, following the path along the heart, directing it to the right, slowly and steadily. He allows the new heart to settle and seep into place. Finally, the process is complete. Adrian realizes that this is not a mana heart he created for someone else, but one that belongs entirely to him. The joy he feels is overwhelming. At that moment, a system window appears, announcing that a mana heart has been created. Adrian is confused, wondering why the system window is appearing now. Immediately after, system notifications begin to appear non-stop, stating that the connection with the source is being restored. The connection is restored, but the status is poor and highly unstable. The system reports that most authorities cannot be used, and that only some authorities are currently available. The authority known as inspection becomes available for limited use. Adrian is now able to check the qualities of opponents whose level is lower than or similar to his own. Completely confused, Adrian reacts in shock. Another notification follows, stating that the authority called Third Eye is now available for extremely limited use. His vision improves noticeably. Soon after, the authority known as Third Ear becomes available for extremely limited use, allowing him to hear far better than before. Adrian realizes that his vision has become incredibly clear, and he can even hear sounds from outside the room. He overhears the maids talking and laughing about changes in his personality, unaware that the pig prince is already dead, and that a sword now inhabits his body. Suddenly, the system notifies that all mana within his body has been exhausted, and the usage of authorities has been forcibly terminated. Adrian understands that this is what extremely limited truly means. The absolute senses he once possessed as a sword, where he could perceive everything in all directions without a blind spot, are now gone for the time being. He can only squeeze out a tiny amount of mana, just enough to eavesdrop on sounds outside the door or slightly enhance his vision. He realizes that once he begins expanding his mana capacity, these abilities should improve. As the strain fades, hunger hits him. Soon after, his mother arrives and affectionately squeezes his cheeks. She praises him for drinking all of his medicine and proudly calls him a good son. Moments later, the queen brings her brother with her and asks Adrian if he knows who the man is. Adrian admits that he does not recognize him. The queen's brother observes that he truly seems to have lost his memory. The queen then asks her brother to help her son. Adrian observes the queen's brother closely and gets the feeling that the queen's brother dislikes him. The queen's brother makes his position clear from the beginning. He states that the only thing he can do for Adrian is help him shed excess flesh. He makes it clear that he will provide nothing beyond that, and orders Adrian to abandon any foolish expectations. The queen responds by expressing gratitude, stating that she is thankful even for that much. The queen's brother reminds her not to forget that sentiment. From that moment onward, the queen's brother, who is also Adrian's uncle, begins to put Adrian through harsh training. He gives strict orders that from now on, Adrian must seek his uncle's permission for everything he eats or drinks. As the training continues, Adrian's body trembles from the intensity of the practice. Despite his exhaustion, Adrian stands up and declares that he wants to make a bet. He resolves that within 6 months, he will force his uncle to acknowledge him. In his thoughts, he vows to break that arrogant gaze of his uncle at least once. Adrian continues by setting the terms of the bet. He promises that if he fails, he will obey any command his uncle gives. In return, if he succeeds, his uncle must grant him a wish. His uncle reacts with interest and amusement. He accepts the bet, stating that this will at least give him something to enjoy. As the training resumes, Adrian reflects on his bold words. He realizes that to succeed, he must mobilize his mana. He decides to first focus on burning off the fat across his entire body. Adrian begins running, and a blue aura starts to emanate from his body as his mana activates. His uncle notices the phenomenon and realizes that Adrian has created a mana heart. Adrian reacts confidently and admits that he recently succeeded in creating one. He proudly questions whether his uncle regrets making the bet and reflects on the decision he made when he created the mana heart. His uncle responds calmly and explains that his concern lies elsewhere. He wonders where Adrian learned the method to create a mana heart in the first place. Adrian's expression reveals that he does not understand what he did wrong. His uncle explains that a mana heart is actually a low-grade technique, something only low-level mercenaries learn. Hearing this, Adrian is left completely shocked by the revelation. Adrian becomes extremely tense. At that moment, the commander explains that Adrian has been using the mana heart technique at an extremely low level. He clarifies that this is a basic technique, taught only as a foundational concept to low-level recruits. Hearing this, Adrian is completely shocked. He cannot understand what the commander is trying to say. Seeing Adrian's confusion, the commander decides that showing the truth will be more effective than explaining it with words. As he says this, he activates his mana and shapes it into a ring form in his hand. The commander instructs Adrian to observe the technique carefully. What Adrian sees leaves him stunned. He cannot believe that something like this is even possible. Soon after, the commander moves his mana closer to Adrian. Adrian is filled with fear as this happens. However, the mana chains reveal their true nature. They possess the property of crushing the aura generated by a mana heart. Because of this, the mana disperses on the spot. After demonstrating this, the commander explains that mana chains are far easier and more stable to use than a mana heart. He also mentions that even the Count Eli family, who clung stubbornly to the mana heart, fell into complete ruin a century ago. In the present era, no one attempts to use the mana heart anymore. After this incident, Adrian is shown reading a book that explains the basic theory of mana chains. He is deeply surprised while reading it. He realizes how drastically time and methods have changed. The book explains that mages use circles to gather mana. Knights, on the other hand, weave chains to gather mana. A knight's realm is determined by the number of woven chains. The stages are described as single chain, double chain, and triple chain. Beyond that are quad chain and the highest realm, the pentachain. After reading all of this, Adrian slowly begins to believe what he has learned. At the same time, he remains astonished by the knowledge. He continues reading further, absorbing more information. Many of the topics are things he had heard about long ago in the past. While reading, he suddenly comes across something that leaves him extremely shocked. He sees the name of a famous sword saint. That sword saint is Ernest Altringen. Ernest Altringen was known for constantly challenging others for his sword saint title. In the past, he had even challenged Adrian's previous life self once. That man had used strange arts that were neither swordsmanship nor magic. Adrian remembers him very clearly. He begins to wonder what kind of state that man must be in now. The scene then shifts smoothly to the next morning. Adrian is outside, warming up his body. At that moment, the commander approaches him. He asks about the book Adrian had been reading. The commander then continues, stating that by now Adrian should have realized how foolish a decision he had made. The commander's words have no effect on Adrian. Adrian responds with strong confidence. He does not believe at all that he has taken a foolish step. The commander finds it hard to believe that Adrian still does not understand the situation and refuses to step back. At that moment, Adrian activates mana in his hand. He explains that not all mana hearts have the same shape. He reasons that even though children of the same class receive the same education, their talents are never identical. The commander responds by stating that among his soldiers, there are many like Adrian. These soldiers sometimes start believing themselves to be heroes of the past. Every one of them met the same fate. They failed to surpass even 2 chains. In the end, they all fell into ruin. However, if Adrian is truly different from them, then he must prove it himself. The commander demands that Adrian defeat a double chain knight. If Adrian can accomplish this, then the commander will fulfill Adrian's mother's wish. That wish is for the commander to become Adrian's guardian. With unwavering confidence, Adrian responds. He asks his uncle whether becoming his guardian would truly be a good thing. He admits that he is not completely certain about that matter himself. That question causes the atmosphere to fall silent for a brief moment. Adrian's uncle then responds by asking whether Adrian is questioning his qualifications to become a guardian. He is not merely a commander. He is a count of the kingdom and the commander of the Northern Army. He is the master of the Black Lancers. He is also one of the 5 silver lions who serve his majesty. He is a man who has woven 4 rings. A quad-chain knight, Baal Balorhard. That is the name of the man who may one day stand behind Adrian. As this is declared, Baal forcefully releases his aura. He then challenges whether such qualifications are still insufficient to become a guardian. Due to Baal's overwhelming aura, minor injuries begin to appear on Adrian's body. Adrian struggles to endure and contain the pressure. At that moment, Baal's knights immediately draw their swords and point them toward him. They cannot allow Prince Adrian to suffer any further injuries. They demand that Baal step back. Seeing this, Baal bursts into laughter. On the other side, despite being injured, Adrian also begins to smile. Baal then reminds Adrian not to go back on his own words. A short while later, the scene shifts. Adrian is shown completely exhausted. He leans against a table to steady himself. He feels that he almost died at Baal's hands that day. Baal's earlier words echo in his mind. He remembers being insulted and mocked. Bale had said that with such foolish acknowledgement. Adrian dared to challenge him. He had claimed that Adrian would fail even at forming a single mana heart chain. As these insulting remarks resurface, anger begins to rise within Adrian. Filled with rage, he heads toward his room. As soon as he opens the door, someone inside tells him that he has been waiting for him. That person is the royal physician. Adrian remembers him clearly. Seeing that His Highness remembers him brings great joy to the royal physician. Adrian asks him the reason for his visit. The physician explains that he has come under the Queen's orders to use healing magic on His Highness. The physician then manifests his magic. At that sight, Adrian's anger explodes, declaring that it is unnecessary. Adrian pushes the royal physician and throws him out of the room. Adrian believes that all the suffering he endured today would be wasted if healing magic were used. Watching this outburst, Adrian's knight observes him carefully and silently. The scene then transitions to the next morning. Someone enters the dining room and is shocked upon seeing Adrian. That person is smiling. He is the third prince. Adrian is calmly eating breakfast. While eating, he wonders who this person might be. The knight quietly whispers to him that the man is the third prince. The third prince mentions that he heard something unfortunate happen to Adrian. He comments that Adrian looks far better than expected. He even remarks that this is disappointing. Hearing this, Adrian asks why the third prince has come here. He states that whatever happened to him is none of the third prince's concern. These words anger the third prince. He finds it hard to believe that this is the same man who once stabbed himself with his own sword. The third prince then openly states that he heard an interesting rumor about Adrian. According to the rumor, Adrian made a bet with Count Bale. It is said that Adrian intends to duel a double-chain knight. Upon hearing this, Adrian falls silent. After thinking for a moment, the third prince begins to smile. He then steps closer to Adrian. He proposes an idea. He suggests that instead of anyone else, he himself could become Adrian's opponent. After speaking about the challenge, the third prince left the place. The manner in which he issued the challenge filled Adrian with irritation. As he stood there, Adrian began questioning in his mind why the entire Leonberger family was like this. Seeking clarity, Adrian turned to a nearby knight and asked for details about the third prince. The knight revealed that the third prince's name was Gallian. He then continued by explaining that Prince Gillian, the third prince, had been well known for his talent in swordsmanship since childhood. Hearing this, Adrian found it difficult to believe that someone as foolish as the third prince could also be so talented. The knight went on to add further details, stating that the prince had formed 2 rings at the age of just 14, making him exceptionally fast. While their conversation continued, a maid suddenly approached Adrian, holding a large stack of letters in her hands. She apologized for interrupting and explained that all of the letters had arrived for him. Seeing the sheer number of letters, Adrian was shocked. He could not believe that someone like him would receive letters at all. Adrian picked them up and began opening and reading them one by one. As he read, the atmosphere grew quiet for a short while. Every single letter directly challenged Adrian to a fight. Reading the aggressive tone of the challenge-filled letters left him stunned. Soon after, Adrian realized that this was a legal opportunity to beat up those hooligans. Recognizing this perfect chance, his excitement surged. He forcefully grabbed the letters and called the maid back to him. He instructed her to write down the names of everyone who had just sent those letters. The scene then smoothly shifted. In the next moment, a wooden sword was thrown toward Adrian. The sudden action confused him. Bale told Adrian to pick up the sword. He explained that Adrian needed at least a basic understanding of swordsmanship for the bet to remain valid. Bale added that he did not want to hear excuses later about not being taught the basics. As Adrian picked up the sword, he began thinking about Bale's personality with mild surprise. However, the moment he lifted it, intense pain surged through his muscles. His arm refused to move properly. Seeing his reaction, Bale directly asked whether Adrian had avoided using healing magic. Adrian responded by explaining that Bale, being a knight, should know better. He stated that using healing magic interferes with muscle growth and causes long-term problems. Hearing this, Bale fell silent for a brief moment. He knew that Adrian was not wrong. Because of this understanding, Bale did not question Adrian's decision any further. He told Adrian that he would demonstrate the technique only once and would not repeat it. He instructed Adrian to watch carefully. Bale then revealed that this was the kingdom's official training sword technique, the very foundation taught to all knights during their early training. As he pulled the sword close, Bale moved it with such force that multiple afterimages appeared, making it seem as if the sword had clones. He then began swinging the sword at extreme speed in every direction. The sword started to resemble a flashing beam of light. Maintaining a serious expression, Bale raised the sword high and spun it with tremendous force. The movement generated a round, swirling current of air around him. Witnessing this sword technique left Adrian completely shocked. Bale eventually came to a stop. Adrian could not believe that soldiers used this technique to build their foundation. Seeing Adrian's astonishment, Bale found his reaction somewhat strange. As Bale returned the sword to its place, he explained that although it was a training sword lacking sharpness, it remained faithful to the basics. Because of that, it was the best possible form of swordsmanship for learning. He added that, considering Adrian's talent, this training was already more than what he deserved. After saying this, Bale became slightly confused. The reason was that Adrian was smiling. Inside his mind, Adrian reflected that even after so much time had passed, the great swordsmanship that once slaughtered the mad dragon was now being treated as nothing more than a lowly training technique. Bale then continued by stating that the training alone would not be enough to win the bet. He suggested that, after learning the basics, Adrian could ask his mother to request another master. Adrian immediately dismissed the idea. He stated that there was no need. He explained that he did not wish to learn any other swordsmanship. What he already knew was more than enough for him. Hearing Adrian's words, Bale told him to proceed exactly as he wished. With that, Adrian tightly gripped his wooden sword and began practicing on his own. As he trained, thoughts echoed in his mind. He reflected that the reason the current Dragon Slayer was treated as nothing more than a lowly training sword was likely a natural phenomenon. Even though he hated to admit it, he believed it was because the Dragon Slayer lacked the will to slay dragons. To those who had discarded their mana hearts and forgotten how to breathe will into the sword, there was no way they could possess the eyes to recognize the Dragon Slayer's true value. While Adrian continued practicing with these thoughts, Bale suddenly placed his own sword on top of Adrian's blade. The action confused Adrian. Bale explained that strength alone would not give power to the sword. He told him to move the sword the way he had been taught. Bale pointed toward Adrian's stomach, then toward his legs, explaining that if strength was to be applied, it had to come from the entire body. Using only the arms would achieve nothing. This explanation struck a nerve within Adrian. He realized that the body he currently believed in was still extremely weak. Even his imitation of the fake Dragon Slayer technique was clumsy. Yet Adrian firmly believed that the Dragon Slayer was not a useless relic, meant to be discarded like an old shoe. With stubborn determination, he resolved to prove himself no matter what. 2 days passed in this manner. Adrian began running to strengthen his body. Another week went by, and he continued his sword practice without stopping. He then started focusing on mana training as well. After enduring countless training sessions, a system window suddenly appeared before him. It notified him that he had succeeded in changing his constitution through hard training. Adrian stared at the message in shock. Another message followed, stating that the severe obesity trait had changed to normal obesity. His metabolism had become more active due to the change in constitution. He had grown somewhat accustomed to using his body through repeated training. The clumsy trait had disappeared. The effects of exercise had increased significantly. His constitution had changed after steadily accumulating mana. Seeing these messages filled Adrian with happiness. Soon another message appeared, stating that the mana sensitivity disorder trait had disappeared, and the normal mana sensitivity trait had been created. At this point, Adrian was finally able to swing his sword properly. Compared to 1 month earlier, his grip and movement had improved dramatically. He had become far stronger than his past self. Overwhelmed with joy, Adrian began training blindly, pushing himself without restraint. Suddenly, his wooden sword shattered. Bale shouted loudly to snap him out of it. Half of the broken sword flew through the air and crashed onto the ground. Adrian realized that the knight had cut his wooden sword using a real blade. He was left holding the broken handle. Blood began flowing from his hand. Even under the heavy rain, the deep color of his blood was clearly visible as it stained the ground. Confused, Adrian looked toward his uncle. Then his gaze shifted elsewhere, and he froze in shock. He saw the wooden training board used for sword practice completely destroyed by the lightning strike. The sight left him stunned. Uncle Bale yelled angrily at Adrian, calling him a fool. He explained that if Adrian had been holding a real sword while using that technique, he would have ended up dead. Adrian was deeply frightened by this realization. He had been so absorbed in learning the technique that he never noticed when lightning struck the wooden target. Adrian lowered his gaze and stared at his injured hand. At that moment, another system window appeared before his eyes. It stated that he had completely awakened from a state of extreme concentration, although the body still remembered those intense sensations. A new trait, super concentration, had been created. Seeing this, Adrian began laughing with joy. Inside his mind, he thought that if he concentrated twice as hard, he would end up being struck by lightning and die. As soon as that thought crossed his mind, his body gave out. Adrian began losing consciousness. A knight rushed toward him, but Bale caught Adrian first. He stared at him in astonishment. Due to days of exhaustion, Adrian's body was no longer able to move. Watching how hard he had pushed himself, Bale concluded that Adrian was truly a stubborn fellow. In the next scene, Adrian awakens from his sleep and immediately rises from the bed. Without considering the limits of his body, he has continued to push himself beyond reason. As he steadies his breath, his thoughts move forward, recalling that as a sword he had already achieved every possible accomplishment. The nameless war hero, the sword master, the mercenary king, and the founder of a kingdom. He remembers how he led wars to victory, elevated both flesh and soul, and guided the paths of countless heroes. Gruhorn appears in his memories as a wise advisor and an outstanding teacher. Yet, despite all of that, he realizes he was always nothing more than a third party in the grand flow of history. While lost in these thoughts, his gaze falls once more upon his injured hand. He continues reflecting that this was the reason he had swung his sword until he reached such a state, intoxicated by the sensation of sweat, effort, and claiming all the fruits entirely as his own. At the same time, he acknowledges that if things continue at this pace, his weak body will soon be ruined. He concludes that the mind and the body must be balanced. He notes that it has already been over a month since he created the mana heart, and since he has gathered a considerable amount of mana during that time, he believes he should soon be able to move on to the next stage. With this resolve, Adrian begins to activate his mana. A system window appears, displaying a message that confirms his success. Mana is shown gathering at the center of Adrian's body, and through this process, his body's capabilities increase. The mana heart then expands. Adrian is able to see the mana before him, placing his hand beneath it. Another system message appears, stating that the body has become capable of withstanding a little more mana. The mana then begins to flow through his body, like veins running through his muscles. It penetrates his muscles and strengthens his bones as well, after which the system displays another message, explaining that his physical constitution has changed due to the expanded mana heart. Adrian then opens his eyes, realizing that the purpose for which he activated his mana has been completed. Afterward, he looks toward his sword and considers testing his newly developed body. He lifts the sword and swings it, and as a result, the sword reaches the learned level. He becomes capable of using aura at a basic level. With growing confidence, Adrian believes that with this technique, he can at least surpass the basic stage. As the scene transitions, Bale appears and informs Adrian that rumors are spreading throughout the entire kingdom. Upon hearing about the rumors, Adrian becomes surprised. Bale clarifies that he is referring to the troublesome bet and explains that because of it, even he himself has been greatly inconvenienced. Bale then suggests that it might be better for Adrian to quickly find a sparring partner. This proposal leaves Adrian somewhat taken aback. Adrian begins thinking about the third prince and states that he has already decided who his sparring partner will be. He further explains that facing a double chain right away would be difficult for him, so he proposes starting by sparring with single-chain fighters first, leaving the final decision to his maternal uncle. After saying this, Adrian summons his knight, Carl, and asks him for the answer to the question he had previously raised. Carl responds affirmatively, explaining that he has organized everything exactly as requested. He then presents a list of individuals who have sent sparring requests to Adrian. Carl follows this by asking whether Adrian truly intends to have practice matches with these people. In response, Adrian reacts calmly, implying acceptance of that intention. Carl points out that most of the people on the list harbor grudges against Adrian and might attempt to harm him under the guise of a duel. Adrian acknowledges that he is already aware of this risk and therefore insists that his maternal uncle must act as the referee. Bale quietly listens to their entire exchange as the scene settles. No one gives a response, and Adrian continues forward, stating that he is not asking for anything grand, only that no one should die during the match. and that such a favor should be possible to grant. With that, the scene shifts smoothly to a few days later. Arriving at the day of the first match, Adrian's first opponent appears, and the match is set within the royal palace. The moment Adrian sees the palace, he is struck with shock. In his mind, he recognizes it as the first prince's palace, the very place where that scoundrel resides. The man standing before him is identified as Taylor Talheim, the second son of an ordinary baron's family. A few years ago, Adrian had humiliated Taylor and his family simply because they belonged to an ordinary lineage. Taylor's thoughts surface as he recalls how his father and older brother suffered an indelible insult from the scoundrel prince. He remembers how the family's honor was trampled into the ground, and how his father and brother have continued to be targets of ridicule by many nobles even to this day. Filled with anger, Taylor thinks of Adrian by name and vows that he will surely make him pay dearly for that day. Outwardly, he offers his greetings to His Highness, the first Prince Adrian Leonberger. Taylor is then shown standing on the ground with his sword in hand. After giving his introduction, he continues by declaring that he is an apprentice knight of the single chain and a practitioner of the Talheim family's swordsmanship. Adrian responds by questioning why Taylor is being so grandiose for a mere practice match that is not even an official duel. He then points toward Taylor and asks Carl whether this man is truly a knight, remarking that he looks incredibly weak. Hearing these words, Taylor is consumed by anger. In his mind, he confirms that the rumors are true, believing Adrian to be an impolite and arrogant man who does not know his place and lacks common sense. At that moment, Bale steps in and stops Adrian from continuing his remarks. Bale approaches Taylor and tells him that he understands his feelings, but reminds him that the match has not even begun yet, and urges him to withdraw his momentum. Upon seeing Bale, a different light appears in Taylor's eyes, as if he is looking at someone he deeply admires. With great respect, Taylor greets Bale politely, saying that it is nice to meet him. Watching this interaction, Adrian becomes irritated and remarks that one would think his maternal uncle was the prince instead. Bale responds by telling Adrian that he should have behaved himself properly in the past. Adrian answers back, expressing annoyance at old stories being brought up at every single turn. After the exchange ends, Bale instructs both of them to take their positions. Both Adrian and Taylor move into place. Taylor activates his aura, and before launching his attack, he warns Adrian to be careful. He then advances to strike. Taylor charges forward at high speed, but Adrian dismisses his movement as useless. Adrian activates mana within his sword and strikes back. The sight of that mana leaves Taylor in shock. Under the pressure of Adrian's attack, Taylor is dragged and violently pushed back. He cannot believe that a mana heart is capable of breaking through a mana chain in such a manner. As the moment settles, Adrian calmly remarks that it is nothing more than a slight tingling sensation. Taylor fails to understand Adrian's words, and soon the audience begins to hear a strange sound coming from Adrian's sword. Unlike anything they have heard before, everyone is thrown into confusion. Bale, however, understands clearly that this phenomenon is a sword cry, and even he is deeply shocked by it. Taylor refuses to accept what is happening and, filled with overwhelming rage, charges forward once again to attack. Seeing the fury reflected in Taylor's expression, Adrian is taken aback. The two swords clash at the same time, sending sparks through the air. Taylor then launches a series of wild attacks, swinging his sword at Adrian almost like a madman. After repeatedly dodging the onslaught, Adrian's sword clashes once more with Taylor's blade. This time, Adrian is pushed backward. As he regains his footing, he reflects internally that it is said the mana of the ring is the polar opposite of the mana heart's mana, and he realizes that those words were indeed correct. With a faint smile, he senses that the mana feels unstable, as if it could backflow at any moment. Still facing Taylor, Adrian sharply brings up Taylor's status as the second son of Baron Talheim. He extends his sword toward him and urges him to calm his mind. After that, Adrian closes his eyes and begins to concentrate on his senses. He feels as though he is submerged in water, and in that state, something within him awakens. He recognizes it as a part of his own soul, known by many names such as a magic sword or a divine sword. At that very moment, the image of a dragon's eye opening appears, and a system window displays a message stating that the mana heart has accepted a grand will, that a single color has been overlaid upon the previously colorless mana heart, and that the sleeping will of the dragon slayer has awakened. Adrian continues inwardly, realizing that this is the memory of the sword that was most recently active, and the essence of the heart crafted specifically to slaughter dragons. Another system message appears, announcing that the heart of the dragon slayer has been activated. Adrian then opens his eyes, which are now completely covered in a red hue. His heart begins to pound violently. From within him, a dragon-shaped aura starts to emerge. Another system message follows, stating that the energy flowing from the heart of the dragon slayer has merged with the dragon slayer sword. The dragon-shaped aura continues to pour out from Adrian's body with such intensity that it becomes visible to everyone present. Taylor is left in utter shock, as he has never witnessed anything like this before. Bale immediately calls out for Adrian to stop, but Adrian does not hesitate. In the very next instant, he launches a direct attack toward Taylor. Adrian's sword attack was extremely dangerous. At that moment, a brief flashback is shown. In the past, Adrian had asked his uncle for a favor. He requested that if his uncle ever felt Adrian was about to kill his opponent, he must intervene without hesitation and stop him at any cost. That exact situation now unfolded. Adrian was on the verge of killing Taylor. Remembering the favor, the uncle instantly stepped between them and activated his mana. He launched a direct mana attack at Adrian. The impact sent Adrian flying backward, slamming violently into the wall. Immediately after, Adrian's knights raised their swords and pointed them at Count Bale. Knight Carl questioned Bale's actions, stating that attacking a royal individual so suddenly was not appropriate for a count, regardless of the situation. At that moment, Adrian regained his composure and began standing up. He ordered his knights to step back. In front of everyone, Adrian revealed that he himself had asked his uncle to intervene if things reached that point. However, he then scolded his uncle, saying he never asked to be struck with such overwhelming force. His words shocked everyone present. In the following moment, Adrian focused his mana inward to heal his heart. He felt as though his mana heart had been split apart. As he stabilized himself, he reflected on his uncle's strength. He realized that his uncle's power was on a completely different level, compared to someone with only a single mana chain. Since he had taken the attack head-on, he noted with relief that there seemed to be no lasting aftereffects. Feeling satisfied, Adrian concluded that everything had turned out well in the end. He also reminded himself that he had won the sparring match. Just then, his uncle suddenly appeared and questioned the reason behind Adrian's cheerful mood. Adrian asked why his uncle had come there. The uncle explained that he had come to observe what Adrian was doing. The uncle then directly brought up the sword technique Adrian had used moments earlier. In response, Adrian stated that he had simply remained faithful to the essence of the sword. The uncle found himself at a loss for words. Internally, he pondered Adrian's nature, noting that this was someone who had never even seen a real battlefield. He then explained his interpretation, stating that the essence Adrian had conceived was pure murderous intent. He described it as blatant and offensive. Hearing this explanation, Adrian responded awkwardly, expressing that it was unexpected. He admitted that he had anticipated a long lecture about the sword being a pursuit of perfection. The uncle clarified his stance, stating that he was a soldier, not a knight. He followed the path of victory rather than the path of righteousness. Adrian offered no response to this declaration. The uncle continued, warning that Adrian's sword was excessive. He cautioned that if bloodlust grew too strong, one would lose the ability to distinguish friend from foe. Adrian questioned this warning, explaining that this very issue was the reason he was making such an effort to correct his sword. In reply, the uncle stated that he would simply observe. He would watch to see whether Adrian would be consumed by his inner demons or overcome them. After 3 days of intense practice sparring had ended, the scene shifted. Taylor was practicing alone on the training grounds. Adrian approached him and confirmed his name. He told Taylor that he had worked extremely hard over the past 3 days. Because of that effort, Adrian suggested that Taylor now deserved proper rest. Despite saying this, Adrian felt a sense of shame. He believed that if Taylor had managed to land even a small amount of damage on him, it might have brought Taylor some peace. However, that never happened. Taylor was clearly shocked upon hearing this. At that moment, Adrian gave an order for something to be brought. A maid arrived carrying a box. Seeing the box, Taylor asked what it was. Adrian then explained that he had heard about how badly Taylor had been treated by him in the past. Adrian placed the box into Taylor's hands and continued. He stated that he did not know whether this would ease Taylor's heart, but instructed him to deliver it to Baron Telheim. He explained that it was not much, only an offering along with a letter. He then firmly told Taylor to leave immediately and to be careful on his way. Hearing this, Taylor began to blush intensely. As Adrian turned away and started walking, he reflected internally that he had no obligation to clean up after the mess that trash had created. Taylor thanked him and departed from the area. Adrian then continued his thoughts, reminding himself that if someone was made to work, a price always had to be paid. In the next scene, it became clear that the Trash Prince's practice sparring had become a massive topic of discussion throughout the Leonberger kingdom. People were shown gossiping openly. They claimed that his arrogance had dug his own grave. They insisted that the first prince would pay dearly for his past misdeeds. Some expressed curiosity about how much of a fool he would make of himself. However, even after several days passed, the news everyone was expecting never arrived. One man initially believed that the other was talking about the sparring event. The other person quickly clarified, explaining that there had been some kind of misunderstanding. He stated that His Highness the First Prince was not a bad person, as the rumors had claimed. Another man added that both sides had done their best in the duel, and that was all. A third person repeated the same statement, saying that both sides had simply done their best. Seeing their words and behavior, the listeners were left completely shocked. The scene then revealed the person who had heard all of this news. Upon hearing these comments, Adrian was filled with anger. He furiously thought that they were only keeping their mouths shut because they were embarrassed after losing to him. He criticized the nobles, stating that they clearly had nothing better to do. He believed they should spend their time doing something productive instead. Listening to this outburst, his uncle remarked that Adrian was not one to talk. At that moment, Taylor returned while carrying the box. Seeing him, Adrian angrily instructed Taylor to make sure he spread the word about the sparring results whenever he went out. Frightened by Adrian's anger, Taylor quickly agreed. Adrian then thought to himself that the rumors would finally settle down now. At that same moment, he became slightly surprised. A maid approached and informed him that there were rumors claiming His Highness was using intimidation to fabricate the results of the matches. Hearing this, Adrian became serious. Internally, however, he felt oddly satisfied and decided to focus solely on training. He drew his sword and began swinging it in multiple directions. At the same time, he infused the movements with mana. The mana was released outward from his central point. He then asked Carl how many sparring partners remained. Carl replied that today's visitor was the last one. Adrian commented that apprentice knights were no longer sufficient for him. Carl responded that at least the final opponent was a proper knight. He explained that she was someone who had mastered true swordsmanship, unlike others who merely refined their family sword. She was an elite who had entered a knight order to truly train her blade. Hearing this, Adrian smiled and identified her as an apprentice knight belonging to the Iron Lion Knight Order. The scene then shifted elsewhere. A woman was seen approaching from a distance. Noticing her, a guard stated that based on the Iron Lion Knight Order crest on her armor, it was definitely her. He identified her as the flower blooming on the cliff. He called her the Thorny Rose, the woman who had broken the hearts of all men. As the woman continued forward, the guard spoke again, praising her extraordinary beauty. He remarked that it was impressive that even a woman like her had come here on her own feet. Another guard responded, saying that in that sense, the prince possessed quite an impressive capability. He then added that it would be a truly hilarious sight if the prince were to be humiliated by that woman. The Iron Lion Knights were an elite knightly order that rivaled all others in the kingdom. Standing at the pinnacle of both fame and combat prowess, their name alone commanded respect, and their members were regarded as living legends among soldiers and nobles alike. Among their ranks stood Arwen Kurgian, a trainee knight whose talent had already drawn widespread attention. Though still an apprentice, her official induction into the Iron Lion Knights had already been confirmed, marking her as a rising star and a promising candidate for the future of the order. During a formal gathering, Knight Adrian attempted to explain the strained history between Prince Adrian and Arwen, describing it as nothing more than a minor misunderstanding from the past involving His Highness and the young knight. However, Adrian himself dismissed that explanation internally, believing it was no misunderstanding at all, and thinking that Arwen had willingly chosen to fight. A maid then revealed that it had been Prince Adrian who had insulted Arwen in the past. Upon hearing this, a nearby swordsman was visibly shocked and internally cursed Adrian for his behavior. The scene then shifted smoothly into the past. In that memory, Prince Adrian was shown ordering Arwen to become his personal maid. When Arwen refused, he lashed out at her verbally. hurling cruel and demeaning words without restraint. Back in the present, Adrian reflected on that memory, recalling that he had heard something like that. He rationalized his past actions as nothing more than the twisted courtship of a rotten scoundrel, convincing himself that there was no way Arwen could have looked at him back then, and truly found him ugly. The present scene resumed as Arwen formally bowed before Prince Adrian, greeting him respectfully and acknowledging that it had been a long time since they last met. Her words carried a sharp edge as she remarked that he had not changed at all. Adrian responded with confidence, asserting that he had indeed changed, and changed a great deal. Internally, he reflected that the very core of his being was now different, attributing it all to the karma he had accumulated over time. At that moment, Count Balerhard descended into the arena. Upon seeing him, Arwen immediately bowed deeply and introduced herself as an apprentice knight of the Iron Lion Knights, formally greeting Count Balerhard with unwavering respect. The narrator emphasized her name once more, Arwen Kurgian, as she stood before the Count. Count Balerhard warned her to be cautious, noting that the prince's sword carried a venomous edge. With that warning delivered, he instructed both fighters to take their positions and declared that the match would begin immediately. As the duel commenced, Adrian observed Arwen closely, expressing curiosity about the skill of the Iron Lion Knight's hopeful prospect. Arwen launched her first attack without hesitation. Adrian noticed that her movements were sharp and refined, far beyond what one would expect from an apprentice. She landed a powerful strike to his abdomen, causing blood to spill from his mouth. Adrian realized that mana reflux had begun to set in. Arwen continued her relentless assault, striking Adrian repeatedly, without giving him a moment to recover. He found himself being completely pushed back, acknowledging internally that the situation was becoming dangerous, and that this approach would not suffice. When Arwen charged toward him once again, Adrian finally activated a hidden power. The Dragon Slayer's heart awakened within him. Arwen was visibly shocked by the sudden surge of power. Adrian retaliated with a single swing of his sword, forcing Arwen to leap backward to avoid the strike. As she regained her footing, she stared in disbelief, wondering what kind of sword style he was using. Adrian smirked confidently, realizing that possessing a single ring did not make everyone the same. He acknowledged that Arwen was on an entirely different level compared to ordinary fighters, far above the rabble. Even so, he sensed that there was more to assess. At that moment, a system window appeared before him, announcing that the authority of evaluation was available for limited use. The system revealed Arwen Kurgian's status. She was a 19-year-old female apprentice knight. Her aptitude showed high proficiency in swordsmanship and archery, strong combat arts, and exceptional mana sensitivity. Her traits included sword genius, competitive spirit, peerless beauty, a tough exterior with a soft heart, and a romanticist nature. After reviewing the evaluation, Adrian concluded that Arwen was slightly weaker than him, though still comparable. Both fighters then charged at each other once more. A red aura erupted from Adrian's body, while a blue aura surged from Arwen's. Their blades clashed repeatedly as the battle intensified. As the fight dragged on, exhaustion weighed heavily on both of them. Recognizing their limits, Count Balerhard intervened and declared that the match would end for the day and resume tomorrow. Adrian remarked confidently that he had been just about to finish things. Arwen responded with a smirk, stating that she had been thinking the same. Adrian laughed and suggested that they continue with one more match immediately, but Count Balerhard sternly ordered them to stop. He instructed both of them to seek medical treatment at once. As they received treatment, Adrian remained resolute, vowing internally that he would not lose. The following day, both fighters returned to the arena, prepared to resume the duel. Knights in the crowd whispered among themselves, noting that the match had already continued for 3 days, and expressing doubt that either combatant would lose easily. Some acknowledged that Arwen's strength was well known, while others admitted surprise at how fiercely Prince Adrian was fighting. Many hoped that today's match would finally reach a conclusion and declare a victor. Before the match began, Adrian announced that he had something to say. Arwen replied that if he intended to apologize, she did not expect it. Adrian clarified that an apology was not his intention. He pointed out that since they were fighting so fiercely, there should be a prize for the winner. He proposed that the loser would grant one wish to the victor. If ordered to kneel, the loser would kneel. If ordered to prostrate themselves and apologize, they would comply. Hearing this, the surrounding knights reacted in alarm. They warned that, as a member of the royal family, Prince Adrian absolutely could not make such a proposition, and urged him to withdraw his words. Adrian dismissed them, ordering outsiders to stay out of it and questioning why there were so many spectators interfering. Arwen then responded with composure. Though still an apprentice, she reminded everyone that she was a knight loyal to the Leonberger royal family. She stated that she would never commit lèse-majesté against His Highness. However, as long as the terms remained within the bounds permitted by him, she believed she was entitled to receive the prize of the bet. Adrian smirked approvingly, praising her reasoning and warning that there would be no taking it back later. With that, both fighters launched themselves at each other once again. Adrian unleashed a slash so fast that Arwen was left stunned. She realized in that instant that he had been hiding his true power all along. Their swords clashed repeatedly, sparks flying with each impact. Arwen delivered a powerful strike that forced Adrian backward. Suddenly, Adrian charged forward and executed a devastating attack. The force of his strike shattered Arwen's sword completely. Arwen froze in shock, her expression filled with sorrow as she stared at the broken blade in her hand. Standing victorious, Adrian calmly declared that he had won the bet. The position was that of escort knight to the kingdom's infamous executioner like first prince. Contrary to what had been feared, the work itself was not very difficult. The prince did appear somewhat arrogant at first glance, but he did not act cruelly or violently without reason, unlike what the rumors claimed. In fact, the reality was very different from those rumors. During one rainy day of practice, Adrian swung his sword with tremendous force and completely destroyed a wooden training sword. Watching this, Carl felt a strong intuition that His Highness would grow into a truly great person. That was what Carl believed at the time. The story then returned to the present. Adrian openly stated that he wanted Arwen. Hearing this, Carl began to think that perhaps he had misjudged His Highness after all. Arwen then asked whether this was truly what Adrian wanted. In response, Adrian smirked and made it clear that Arwen was nothing more than an ordinary trainee knight who could not even defeat a single rogue prince. However, what he desired was not her current standing. What he wanted was the potential and future of a knight named Arwen Kurgan. He explained that he needed a knight who would follow him by choice, not one who merely stayed by his side due to royal command. He wanted a knight who belonged only to him. He acknowledged that Arwen possessed genuine talent with the sword, and formally asked her to become his knight. Arwen stood frozen in shock. She reflected on her past, explaining that she had become the knight she had always dreamed of becoming. Yet no one ever treated her as a knight. Because of that, she worked harder than anyone else. She defeated all the other trainees, and despite achieving such results, she was never acknowledged as a true knight. Hearing Adrian say that he wanted her potential and future, as a knight made her question whether his words were truly sincere. Arwen then asked Adrian to promise her one thing. She asked to be treated not as a woman, but as a knight. She vowed that if he could promise that, she would follow his will. Adrian agreed to this promise. Arwen then knelt down and declared herself as Arwen, eldest daughter of the Kurgan family. She pledged her loyalty to Prince Adrian Leonberger and dedicated her sword and the rest of her life to him. Adrian placed his sword on her shoulder and, in the name of Adrian Leonberger and the legitimate bloodline of Leonberger, officially knighted her. He instructed her to be brave, polite, and loyal. The scene then showed Arwen training diligently. Watching her, some of the other trainees whispered among themselves. They questioned the logic of swearing loyalty to a scoundrel and doubted whether such an oath made any sense. They claimed the oath was made as part of a bet and insisted it should be invalidated somehow. They mentioned hearing that Arwen had refused help, which made the entire situation seem suspicious. To them, it smelled fishy. They speculated that there might be some sort of relationship between Arwen and the prince. They suggested that Adrian might have appearances to maintain and could not take her as a mistress, so he used a knight's oath as a cover instead. They found it strange from the very beginning, especially questioning why she would participate in a suspicious duel held by someone like him. Elsewhere, Adrian vented his frustration, angrily questioning whether he was some sort of axis of evil, and lamenting that he was treated as if he were the worst person in the world. Carl reminded him of what he had said a few days earlier, on the day of the final duel, about wanting a knight who would not guard his side simply by royal order. Adrian acknowledged this and explained that it was simply the truth. He pointed out that if a royal order came down immediately, Carl would be forced to go elsewhere. He added that if Carl could not accept that, then Carl could always make a vow later. Carl asked if Adrian would accept his vow if he made one. Adrian immediately refused, stating that he hated the idea because there was no fun in raising Carl. Carl merely chuckled in response, Soon after, Adrian received a letter. The contents expressed confusion about why he had been released from confinement a month and a half early. It referenced how, when he had been thrown into the prince's palace, it had seemed as though he would never be seen again. Reading this, Adrian admitted that he truly did not understand what that old man was thinking. Carl asked whether Adrian was happy that his confinement was finally over. Adrian replied that he did not really care. Even if he left the prince's palace, he had nowhere to go. He knew no one and had no one to meet. At that moment, a maid approached and apologized, explaining that she had happened to see an invitation addressed to His Highness. She handed him the invitation card. Adrian read it and noted that it was for a social club for special young lords, a social gathering in which he had once been a member. He wondered whether it was a strange place. The maid hesitated and awkwardly explained that, to women, the pastimes of young lords were often incomprehensible. From this, Adrian concluded that it was likely just a club for drinking and chasing skirts. He dismissed the idea at first, stating that he was too busy training and had no reason to attend such a useless gathering. However, when he noticed the name of the Eli family listed on the invitation, something stirred in his memories. According to his maternal uncle, that family had clung to the concept of the manhwa heart until the very end and eventually fell into ruin about 100 years ago. Realizing this, Adrian decided that he would have to attend after all. The maid acknowledged his decision and said she would prepare his attire. As Adrian reflected on this choice, he quietly hoped that the household in question was not yet in a completely pathetic state. The body of the trash first prince had been possessed, and 4 full months had passed since training began and weight loss started. A tailor was crafting a black outfit specifically for Adrian. When Adrian put on the completed clothes, the tailor became visibly excited and eagerly asked whether His Highness was satisfied with the outfit. The tailor emphasized that not a single word of Adrian's instructions had been omitted. The color was black, ornaments were kept to an absolute minimum, and the overall design was deliberately simple. Despite this simplicity, the tailor proudly stated that Adrian's dignity remained completely intact. Standing before the mirror, Adrian observed that he had certainly lost a great deal of weight. The tailor confirmed this with excitement, stating that Adrian's measurements had decreased by more than half. Hearing this, Adrian decided to entrust the tailor with creating the outfit for the royal banquet as well. The tailor reacted with enthusiasm and was ready to begin work immediately. But Adrian stopped him with a smile and asked him to wait a little longer, explaining that his measurements would change again by then. As time passed, Adrian reflected that only a few days had gone by since his house arrest had been lifted. He now found himself on the way to that cursed social club for special noble sons. He thought about how being a prince was truly an exhausting position. Everything about it felt stifling, from the clothes to the carriage, to the guards and even the people around him. Everything felt utterly suffocating. Inside the carriage, a maid was seated beside Adrian. He noticed a wound on her neck and asked about it. The maid explained that it was due to her own inadequacy and stated that it was something His Highness had been right to reprimand her for. Hearing this, Adrian grew angry internally and realized that the real Adrian had been a clumsy and awful person. The deeper he dug into the past of this body, the more horror stories he uncovered. He realized that although he had seen this maid for months, he did not even know her name. At 78%, he finally asked for her name. Startled, the maid introduced herself as Adelia Bayern. Hearing the name Bayern, Adrian felt that it sounded familiar. Adelia explained that it was a family that barely managed to keep its name on the noble registry. This caused Adrian to reflect deeply, wondering how he could hear that name again in a place like this. His thoughts drifted far into the distant past, to a time before kingdoms or even cities existed. Among the many races of the continent, it had been an era where weak humans were naturally robbed and killed. There were those who put an end to the miserable history of that species. At the end of a long and great war, the saviors who finally made humans the dominant species of the continent emerged. People called them the 5 electors. One of those 5 heroes was the king of the giants. At 77%, the story focused on the one who severed the head of Jedel and ended the long history of exploitation. That hero was known as the Iron-Blooded Sword Marquis, Agnes Bayern. Adrian recalled how Agnes had slaughtered countless monsters using that very power, covering his ears in discomfort. He thought that just imagining it made his ears feel dirty. He then reflected on how shocking it was that a descendant of the Bayern family had ended up in such a state, and wondered what on earth had happened. for things to turn out this way. At that moment, Carls arrived and informed Adrian that they had reached their destination. Adrian told Adelia that they would talk later, leaving both Carls and Adelia confused by his sudden dismissal. Soon after, a man approached and bowed deeply before Adrian. He introduced himself as Bernardo of the Eli family and formally greeted Prince Adrian Leonberger. He expressed great happiness at seeing Adrian safe and well. Adrian observed him carefully and realized that this man was a descendant of the Eli family. Looking at him, Adrian thought that he simply looked like a punk. Bernardo commented that Adrian must have suffered greatly to become so thin and noted that his face looked strange. He expressed concern that Adrian's body might still be unwell. Adrian placed a hand on Bernardo's shoulder and smiled, explaining that he was fine and that he was simply thinking that coming here had been the right choice. He added that thanks to Bernardo, the day was going to be very entertaining. Inside the venue, nobles were seen completely drunk, flirting openly with women, and indulging themselves without restraint. Watching Adrian, Bernardo found the situation strange. Normally, this trash prince would already be drunk and harassing everyone around him. The atmosphere felt different from before. Suddenly, a drunken noble staggered toward Adrian and mentioned hearing rumors that Adrian had brought Arwen into the Lion Fire Castle. He remarked that the rumors had spread like wildfire. Hearing this, other nobles reacted with regret, claiming they had been too late and that they had been interested in that woman for quite some time as well. They complained that if they had known this would happen, they should have claimed her oath first. The drunken noble continued, saying that Arwen had been beautiful even in armor, and that he could only imagine how incredible her bare skin must be like. In response, Adrian calmly asked whether the noble had a younger brother or sister at home. The man replied that he had already mentioned before that he had one younger brother. Without hesitation, Adrian delivered a powerful punch that knocked the noble to the ground. Everyone present froze in shock. Adrian then brutally kicked the man in his most vulnerable area and coldly declared that it was a relief that the man's family line would not be cut off. From that moment on, the younger brother would be the heir to the family. Adrian struck the man over and over, each punch landing with brutal force. Gasps spread through the hall as shock and fear rippled among the guests. Even after the noble was already reeling, Adrian grabbed him by the collar once more and prepared to strike again. The man, completely confused and terrified, demanded to know the reason for this sudden violence. Finally recognizing the prince before him, the hall fell silent as Adrian made his stance clear. He could endure being viewed as a villain, a scoundrel or worse, but he would never accept being treated as one. The surrounding nobles were left stunned, unable to understand what he meant or why the situation had escalated so far. Then, without hesitation, Adrian decided the man before him deserved even more punishment. A single, devastating punch sent the noble flying across the room, where he crashed to the ground and collapsed. Fear gripped everyone present as they watched the noble lose consciousness, utterly defeated by the unexpected beating. From that point on, Adrian summoned Bernardo. The young man immediately knelt, his voice shaking as terror overtook him. With a cruel smile, Adrian reminded him that the day was far from over and promised that what awaited him would be anything but pleasant. Bernardo, frozen with fear, could not understand why the prince was acting so mercilessly. Adrian then ordered Bernardo to summon the court knights at once. Without even a moment of hesitation, Bernardo obeyed and ran off to carry out the command. Amid the chaos, one of the guests attempted to flee the scene, but Adrian stopped him with a cold, piercing glare, standing amidst the destruction he had caused. His face marked with faint traces of violence, Adrian surveyed the hall. He commanded all the women present to leave immediately. Panic spread among the nobles, and one young man stood completely paralyzed, unable to move as fear overwhelmed him. His legs trembled, refusing to respond. Adrian noticed and fixed his gaze on him, reminding everyone that he had ordered only the women to leave. He coldly implied that the man was free to go as well, but if he did, he would not leave as a man. Moments later, Adrian placed his foot firmly on the chest of one of the fallen nobles. Screams erupted throughout the hall as terror reached its peak. The remaining guests watched in silence, too afraid to intervene. Adrian made it clear that none of them had shown proper respect, not a single one kneeling as required. He recalled how one noble had openly mocked him without shame, and how another had dared to insult his personal knight right before his eyes. Turning to the guards, Adrian demanded to know what crimes applied in such a situation. One knight explained that openly disrespecting royalty constituted a grave insult. He went on to state that undermining the authority of the crown was nothing less than treason. The nobles grew pale, realizing the seriousness of the charges. The knight then awaited Adrian's decision, asking whom he wished to see brought to their knees. Adrian responded with a satisfied, chilling smile. His answer was clear without words. He ordered the knights to arrest every noble present. Not long after, Adrian was summoned to the throne room. The king berated him for causing chaos the moment his probation ended, furiously pointing out that 14 sons of noble families had been taken into custody. He accused Adrian of abusing royal authority and exploiting any excuse he could find. Adrian, however, reacted with nothing more than boredom. The king demanded to know whether his son truly understood the consequences of his actions. With so many noble families involved, the political backlash could not be ignored, and punishment seemed inevitable. Adrian calmly questioned whether his father was afraid of those families and their reactions. He explained that the arrested nobles were outcasts even within their own households, failures who brought nothing but shame to their bloodlines. With calculated confidence, he proposed that the king send letters. When asked who those letters would be addressed to, Adrian revealed his plan. He suggested contacting the brothers of the disgraced nobles, men far more capable of suppressing internal unrest. He confidently asked whether his reasoning was flawed. The king remained silent, clearly considering the proposal. After a long pause, he dismissed everyone from the throne room. Adrian left with the satisfaction of knowing he had left his father speechless. Later, Adrian addressed Adelia, telling her not to be so tense and assuring her that he had no intention of harming her. She, however, was overwhelmed with fear and confusion, unable to understand why she had been summoned at all. Adrian observed her in silence, reflecting on how harshly the former prince must have treated her. Her family barely retained noble status, their name little more than a faded entry in the records. Once proud and powerful, the Bayern family had lost all prestige. Their heroic legacy had vanished, their ancestors' achievements forgotten, and their former glory erased without a trace. Activating his ability, Adrian examined Adelia's status. He discovered her aptitude for swordsmanship and her sensitivity to mana, and what he saw next left him stunned. Her traits revealed a terrifying contradiction: a butcher and warmonger at heart, someone who would lose herself in bloodshed and revel in battle, yet also weak-minded, caring, dependent, and utterly servile. Adrian ran his fingers through his hair in frustration. Her talent was extraordinary, but she lacked any trait capable of restraining her madness. The thought of unleashing such uncontrolled power upon the world filled him with dread. The decision before him was far from simple. Even so, he could not ignore such potential. An S-rank talent in swordsmanship was too valuable to discard. As he studied her further, he noticed one exploitable trait: her servile nature. She found fulfillment in absolute devotion to a master. Calling her by name, Adrian demanded that Adelia swear loyalty to him. The request left her utterly shocked, unable to comprehend what it truly meant. He explained that this oath would bind her as his knight, and insisted that it be sworn immediately. Overwhelmed, Adelia fell to her knees. Struggling to process the demand, Adrian reminded her of her family's insignificance and promised to take responsibility for her house. In exchange, she would swear unquestioning loyalty, serve him as her master for life, and obey without hesitation. He declared that if she could not control her madness, he would control it for her. When Adelia asked whether he would truly protect her family, Adrian agreed without hesitation, even offering to summon them to the capital if she wished. Tears filled her eyes as she accepted. She introduced herself as Adelia Bane, eldest daughter of the House of Bame, and pledged her life and loyalty to Prince Adrian Leonberger. She vowed to serve him completely, without question, for the rest of her life. Placing his hand on her head, Adrian accepted the oath. He reminded her that from that moment on, she was bound to obey his commands and never question his orders. Her eyes shone unnaturally, her servile nature fully awakened, devotion etched into her very being. Yet even as everything fell into place, Adrian could not shake the lingering doubt in his heart, wondering whether the choice he had just made was truly the right one. Soon after, rumors began to spread throughout the capital. Whispers claimed that the prince had reverted to his old, disgraceful ways, and that he had gone so far as to appoint a mere maid, someone who had never even held a sword, as his personal knight. As the gossip grew, people started drawing their own conclusions, convinced that Adrian was disguising the creation of a harem behind the title of knighthood. The constant chatter irritated him endlessly. He couldn't understand when everyone had suddenly become so invested in his personal affairs. He found it absurd that appointing a single direct knight had turned into the main topic of discussion since dawn. Before his frustration could settle, the king stormed in, clearly overwhelmed and on the verge of a splitting headache as he struggled to contain the fallout Adrian had caused. Not long after, Balerhard appeared, questioning whether Adrian had completely abandoned the wager they had once made. As if that wasn't enough, Gillian also showed up, openly mocking the absurdity of elevating a maid to knighthood. The endless ridicule wore Adrian down. He couldn't help but marvel at how quickly rumors traveled through the palace. Matters only worsened when a maid announced the arrival of the queen. Panic surged through him, and he desperately wished for even a brief moment of peace. The queen observed him closely, remarking that she had believed he had changed, only to see him drifting back toward his old habits. Yet after a moment of thought, she suggested that perhaps this path was not entirely wrong. She implied that once a wife was chosen for him, his reckless behavior would naturally come to an end. Adrian was left confused as she confidently declared that he should trust her, promising that this time she would personally ensure a suitable bride. When the conversation ended, Adrian stood frozen, unable to process what had just transpired. His thoughts were in complete disarray. Nearby, Adelia appeared equally confused, wondering whether the oath she had taken meant she would now truly possess mana. Adrian confirmed it with a faint smile, warning her that the power she would receive would be anything but ordinary. He gathered his focus and began channeling his bluish energy into her. In his mind, he reflected on how the world had long forgotten the legendary Sword Queen, yet her legacy remained vivid within him. He remembered every step she took, every motion of her blade, and the way her sword moved as though it were alive in her hands. Even the powerful rhythm of her heart echoed in his memories. That forgotten legend seemed to reach out through time, brushing against Adelia as golden energy flowed into her body. The power condensed within her chest, forming a brand new core, pulsing with life. Moments later, a status window confirmed the presence of mana within Adelia Bairn. The energy had been successfully imprinted and fully stabilized. Her eyes gleamed as the mana heart was completed at last. For the first time in her life, she could feel real mana flowing within her. Adrian explained that the process she had undergone was a refinement method and instructed her to practice it regularly. Immediately afterward, a sharp pain pierced his head. Adelia panicked, fearing something had gone wrong. Adrian found it astonishing that forging just a single mana heart had pushed him to such a state. Speaking weakly, he reassured her that it was nothing more than exhaustion. Adelia, deeply shaken, couldn't understand why he would go to such extremes for her sake. Adrian dismissed the concern and told her she could leave. However, she remained motionless, silently staring at him. When he noticed her gaze, she suddenly bowed deeply, declaring her eternal loyalty and devotion to him. With an amused smile, Adrian simply reminded her that from now on, he was her master. Adelia responded with overwhelming enthusiasm, her eyes sparkling with joy at her new role. Watching her, Adrian felt a strange unease, worrying that one day she might forget who truly held authority between them. When he glanced back at her intense expression, that fear only deepened. Several days later, Kars contacted Adrian with new information regarding Bernardo Eli. He reported that Bernardo was currently being held by the Royal Guard as a witness to the previous incident. Adrian wondered whether he would be required to attend the trial, but Kars assured him that royalty never testified. Relief washed over Adrian. Still, he couldn't help but think that the entire situation was being blown far out of proportion for what should have been a simple proceeding. Turning his attention to Adelia, he asked about her condition, which immediately made her nervous. He questioned whether her mana heart had fully stabilized and, without leaving room for argument, ordered her to begin participating in his daily training sessions. Pointing toward the courtyard, he instructed her to change and meet him at the training grounds immediately. He also demanded that she discard her old cleaning rags, reminding her that she was no longer just a maid. At the training field, Adrian began stretching in preparation for physical exercise. As he loosened his arms, an indignant voice rang out. Questioning his actions, Adrian responded casually, only for his furious uncle to clarify that his concern was not directed at him. Balerhard pointed toward Adelia, who was running across the field, and questioned why such a frail-looking girl was present during training. With a confident smirk, Adrian confirmed the rumors, openly acknowledging that he intended to make her a knight. Balorhard exploded with outrage, accusing him of treating the title of knight as meaningless. Adrian, already irritated, dismissed the intrusion and questioned why his uncle had become so unbearably annoying. Meanwhile, Adelia continued running nonstop, overhearing the heated argument as she trained. Eventually, she collapsed to her knees, weakly announcing that she had completed the 10 laps she was ordered to run. Ignoring Balorhard entirely, Adrian approached the exhausted Adelia to check on her condition. She apologized, feeling ashamed of her weakness, but Adrian calmly handed her something to drink. He then began instructing her in the basics, explaining that the day's lesson would focus on fundamental stances. Moving swiftly, he demonstrated a strike for her to imitate. Holding the sword awkwardly, Adelia struggled to maintain proper posture, her breathing heavy as she forced herself to comply. Suddenly, something awakened within her. Her eyes sharpened, and her killer instinct surged forth. In a single motion, she sliced through the air with a flawless, violent strike. Balorhard stared in disbelief, shocked that she had learned simply by observing once. Adelia quickly returned to her usual demeanor, innocently asking whether she had done it correctly, completely unaware of the power she had just released. Analyzing her movements, Balorhard realized with horror that she possessed an innate talent for killing. At the same time, Adrian felt a chill run down his spine as he realized how close he had come to being decapitated. The murderous intent radiating from her blade was unmistakable, driven solely by the desire for blood. The image of his own death flashed through his mind, and cold sweat broke out across his body as he struggled to steady himself. Jillian soon arrived, openly impressed by the maid's hidden potential. Adrian, already on edge, demanded to know why his brother had come. He warned him sharply not to entertain any foolish ideas. Jillian mocked the situation, questioning what Adrian intended to do with someone like her. Drawing his sword, he belittled her, claiming that a maid could never amount to anything under a true master. Releasing his blue aura, he declared that Adrian was incapable of handling her power. Electric mana surged as Jillian increased the pressure. Attempting to intimidate him, Adrian met his gaze without fear, asserting that if he couldn't control her, no one could. His expression darkened as he made it clear that he alone was qualified to guide her. Mana erupted from Adrian's body, forming a powerful blue sphere around him. His true nature revealed itself as he recalled his past victories. The giant king he had defeated, the bone dragon he had slain in the mountains, the legendary magic sword Gruhen emerged, gleaming brilliantly as memories of countless fallen demons surfaced. His eyes glowed red as a terrifying murderous aura flooded the field. Faced with that overwhelming presence, Jillian instinctively retreated, shaken to his core by the danger he sensed. In the end, Adrian asserted his claim unmistakably, making it clear that Adelia belonged solely to him. Wrapped in a blazing red aura, Adrian made his warning unmistakable. The killing intent in his gaze completed the message without words. Adelia belonged to him alone. The sinister energy surrounding his body intensified by the second, pressing outward like a living force. Turning his back slightly, he made it clear that Jillian was never to desire her. The pressure radiating from Adrian became suffocating, sharp enough to feel lethal. Facing his brother once more, he asserted absolute ownership over everything connected to Adelia. No one else held the right to touch what was his. Jillian remained silent, fully aware that he could not prevail. The warning had been delivered, and under that overwhelming pressure, he retreated. His eyes glowed faintly red, revealing a buried madness beginning to surface as bloodlust crept into his thoughts. As consciousness slipped, reality dissolved around Adrian. Vitality and warmth vanished, replaced by an endless void of calm and cold. He sank deeper into the darkness of his own mind, descending without resistance. Within that abyss, a massive sword emerged, towering and imposing. It was the true manifestation of his ancient soul. Damned souls surrounded him, spectral hands dragging him downward as his essence became a mere drop within a frozen lake of eternal chaos. He resisted with sheer will, refusing to sink any further. Power surged outward as he expelled the souls clawing at him. Red and blue energies erupted violently, colliding in a catastrophic burst. Regaining control, the blue mana returned to circulate through his exhausted body. Adrian drew a deep breath, forcing stability back into himself. His aura faded, and the training grounds slowly returned to normal as the oppressive tension finally began to ease. From a distance, Jillian reflected in silence, wondering if even the past itself was now forbidden to him. Shaken and confused by what he had witnessed, he departed without another glance. Balorhard erupted in anger, declaring that Adelia carried the fate of thousands of soldiers on her shoulders. He compared her worth to that of 1,000 warriors, likening her to legendary figures of old. Adrian listened with visible boredom, allowing the speech on conviction to wash over him. Recalling the tragedy of the northern winter, he made it clear that repeating such a disaster was unnecessary. After a brief hesitation, he acknowledged the complexity of the situation. Attempting to claim Adelia, Balorhard offered her the chance to become a proper knight under his command. Adelia responded without hesitation, placing her hand over her chest. She affirmed that her loyalty already belonged to someone else. Facing the Count firmly, she rejected his authority outright. Adrian watched with satisfaction and dismissed Balorhard's intentions as delusions. He challenged his uncle, questioning whether there were any objections left or whether he intended to force her choice. Raising the threat of treason, Adrian reminded him of past punishments. From afar, Balorhard conceded that nothing more could be done once the offer had been refused. Accepting the outcome, he warned them not to meet an unjust end and departed. With renewed focus, Adelia resumed her training. Her blade tore through the air with violence as she worked tirelessly to refine her raw and terrifying talent. Adrian chose not to interfere, recognizing that disrupting such an unpolished gem would only hinder its growth. Golden energy flared around Adelia as she wielded the sword with flawless posture and overwhelming power. Balorhard's eyes widened in shock as he recognized the familiar resonance within her blade. Adrian, equally astonished, realized that she had already grasped the sword's resonance. He acknowledged her progress as she struggled to catch her breath. Balorhard, feeling threatened, began to suspect that she might surpass him at this rate. Turning to Adrian, he questioned whether the mana heart technique had been taught to her. Adrian confirmed it without hesitation. Balorhard exploded in outrage, condemning the technique as crude and disgraceful. Adrian's patience snapped, and with a cold expression, he ordered the Count to leave immediately before his irritation worsened. Ignoring the command at first, Balorhard lamented that Adrian had ruined the brilliant future Adelia could have had. Adrian summoned cars and instructed him to remove the Count from the courtyard. Snorting in anger, Balorhard stormed off on his own. Adelia watched the powerful noble leave, disappointment clouding her face. Nervously, she questioned whether the technique she learned was truly that flawed. Adrian denied it firmly, reassuring her of its value. Confused, she wondered why the Count had reacted so harshly. Adrian looked away, dismissing it as ignorance born of the current era. Gazing toward the horizon, he lamented how the true worth of the mana heart had been forgotten. He muttered that if people knew the truth, they would never despise that power. Promising to reveal it, he assured her she would soon understand its strength. Suddenly, blue energy exploded outward as a wooden sword slammed into the ground with brutal force. Adrian realized that even now, he still could not fully manifest the aura onto the blade. The weapon felt unbearably heavy in his hands. Balorhard issued a challenge. If Adrian could force him to take even a single step back, he would win, crossing his arms. The Count promised acknowledgement if that happened. Gripping the sword, Adrian confirmed the wager once more. The prize was the granting of a wish. Balorhard offered his greatest treasure, his secret technique if he lost. Rejecting the offer, Adrian charged forward, launching a direct strike toward his uncle's neck. He poured everything into the attack, aiming for the shoulder with unshakable resolve. The wooden sword cut through the wind relentlessly, but Balorhard did not move. Adrian focused all his weight into the final motion, hoping to force even the slightest retreat. The collision was brutal. The wood cracked violently against Balorhard's perfect defense, the sound echoing throughout the courtyard. The sword was flung away, as though it had struck an iron wall. Staggering from the shock, Adrian stared in disbelief at the vast gap in power between them. The difference was an abyss. Balorhard taunted him coldly. Disappointment etched into his expression. Adrian tasted bitterness. He despised being treated like a helpless child. Stepping back, he struggled to regain balance as defeat loomed. Balorhard questioned whether he was ready to surrender. Clearly bored, Adrian refused. Rising stubbornly from the ground, he acknowledged that his uncle was a monster of raw strength, surrounded by terrifying electric mana. Unleashing his own power, blue flames wrapped around Adrian's body. At his current level, everything had to be used. With a mysterious smile, he hinted that something about this moment was different. His posture shifted completely. Balorhard hesitated, suddenly recognizing traces of an ancient sword technique from 4 centuries ago. Memories surfaced of mana heart knights achieving impossible feats in forgotten times. Images of a legendary knight cutting through the skies appeared, one who wielded thunder itself to defend justice. Over time, the Mana heart had been reduced to ridicule and humiliation. Returning to the present, Balorhard questioned the meaning behind this. Idrian rejected that distorted view, asserting that while everyone knew the technique, they had forgotten its true master. He invoked the ancient poem of martial merit, drawing mockery from his uncle, yet curiosity flickered beneath the ridicule. Idrian criticized the ignorance of discarding techniques simply because time had passed. Refusing rest, he prepared to strike again. He declared that a knight's path was forged through personal achievement, that countless victories were proof of honor and strength. His aura transformed dramatically, stunning Balorhard as their blades clashed. Idrian revealed the truth. The poem of martial merit was written through battle itself. The energy surging around him was the embodiment of a knight's will. Wrapped in that aura, the oath of knighthood became flesh and blood. With confidence, Idrian revealed that this perfect fusion was the secret lost to time. Gripping the sword with both hands, he finally unleashed the true power of the Mana heart. A system window suddenly appeared, announcing that the effect of the poem of sparring had been successfully activated. Watching the surge unfold, Balorhard was left utterly perplexed by the sheer volume of energy erupting from his nephew. Even as he muttered his disbelief, he was forced to admit that he had heard ancient legends describing such power, though he had never truly believed them. In the next instant, Idrian vanished from his position, closing the distance in the blink of an eye. He launched himself forward with overwhelming speed. Balorhard barely managed to parry the incoming strike, only to feel an absurd weight crash against his guard, far heavier than anything a beginner should have been capable of producing. Blue mana detonated on impact, violently testing the Count's supposedly unbreakable defense. His arm trembled under the force, and in that moment, Balorhard realized how gravely he had underestimated the ancient technique Idrian was wielding. Forced to react, he channeled his own mana to avoid being driven backward. Idrian pressed the attack without pause. Twisting his body mid-motion, he unleashed another powerful strike. His glowing eyes locked onto his opponent as he poured every ounce of focus into what could decide the fight. Their weapons collided again and again, the speed of the exchange escalating rapidly as blue sparks lit up the courtyard. Bringing the sequence to its peak, Idrian raised his sword high and slammed it down with everything he had. A vertical pillar of light erupted from the impact point, showcasing the true strength that resolve and conviction could forge in battle. For a brief moment, the wooden blade in his hands appeared no different from a legendary weapon. Without hesitation, Idrian continued his assault. The clash of weapons grew violent, sparks scattering in every direction as the wind itself seemed to scream. Cutting through the air, he unleashed a relentless series of strikes that battered Balorhard's defense. Confidence surged through him as he committed fully, determined to shatter his opponent's guard. Balorhard resisted with all his might, yet the power of each blow sent vibrations through his bones. The wooden sword cracked audibly as brute force met brute force. Pushing forward, Idrian managed to unbalance his uncle for a fleeting instant. Sliding back to avoid falling, Balorhard was forced to take a single step backward. Idrian steadied his breathing and reclaimed his stance. Ready to continue, observing the battlefield, Balorhard finally accepted the truth. He had misjudged the boy entirely. Taking the fight seriously at last, he released his aura and countered with renewed intensity. Planting his foot firmly into the ground, Balorhard halted his retreat, tearing up the earth beneath him. The collision of their energies erupted into a massive shockwave that rippled across the courtyard. Dust and light exploded outward, and when the haze finally settled, the duel reached its conclusion. Balorhard raised his hand, bringing the battle to an abrupt end. He openly acknowledged Idrian's strength, conceding defeat. Meanwhile, Idrian dropped to one knee, gasping for breath as exhaustion overwhelmed him. Standing before him, Balorhard examined the shattered remains of the wooden sword. Holding onto the broken hilt, Idrian looked up in confusion, unable to understand the sudden turn of events. Balorhard's thoughts drifted to the distant past, an age when humanity had been hunted like prey. He recalled the appearance of a lone hero who wielded a blade and drove the monsters back. That warrior fought through endless darkness, carving a path for mankind's survival. He faced hell itself, defeated the Demon King, and brought down colossal beasts that once terrorized the world. Leading armies, he ushered in an era defined by living legends. As those images overlapped, Balerhard saw their shadows reflected in the kneeling prince before him. Breaking the silence, Adrian mocked his uncle's stunned expression, questioning whether defeat had dulled the old man's mind. He stamped his foot, making it clear that his aura, no matter how crude or violent it appeared, was not something to be dismissed. He challenged the notion that such wild power was a mistake, questioning whether the path he walked was truly as narrow as others claimed. Scoffing at such limitations, he tightened his grip on the hilt, rejecting his uncle's restricted view of strength. In his mind, Adrian invoked the ancient will that pierced dragon scales. He became the hunter who slew the red dragon, bathing in its blood as its warmth surged through him. That heat pulsed through his veins, awakening a furious power long buried within the blade. Embracing the fear instead of rejecting it, Adrian merged with the murderous essence hidden deep inside himself. With madness in his eyes, he charged forward, driven by a single desire to destroy. Balerhard blocked the incoming strike, but the sheer hatred fueling the blow was overwhelming. Light erupted violently as the wooden sword finally gave way, its structure unable to withstand the pressure. For an instant, Balerhard locked eyes with his nephew and saw the madness burning within him. A blinding flash swallowed the courtyard. The clash of power ended in a thunderous explosion, sending dust and debris billowing into the air until everything was obscured. Coughing heavily, Adrian emerged from the smoke. Utterly drained, he collapsed to his knees, barely able to hold himself upright after expending every last trace of mana. Gasping for breath, he lifted his head, clinging to the hope that he had finally succeeded. Balerhard stood motionless before him, his expression unreadable, looking down. He examined the ground beneath his feet, cracked and devastated by the impact. As Adrian waited for the final verdict of the wager, the Count finally acknowledged the outcome. This time the loss was his. The moment the verdict settled into his mind, a crimson, murderous aura surged into existence without warning. It wrapped around Adrian like a living curse, gnawing at his thoughts. A deafening roar echoed inside his skull as the dragon's soul stirred, awakening with violent hunger, seeking to devour everything in its path. Clutching the broken hilt, Adrian felt the bloodlust claw its way toward the surface, overwhelming his senses. Agony tore through his head as he writhed, his body trembling while the cursed presence tormented his consciousness. He jolted awake moments later, gasping as he shot upright in his bed. Cold sweat drenched his body, his heart pounding violently against his chest. Drawing in a long breath, Adrian slowly realized where he was. He had passed out, and now lay safely within his own chambers. As he sank back against the sheets, exhaustion washed over him. Reflection followed swiftly. He was still too weak. His thoughts drifted backward, not to this life, but to another existence entirely, when his blade had once cleaved through dragons as if they were nothing more than brittle armor. The overwhelming might of that former life still echoed vividly in his memory. His hand tightened around the sheets, frustration burning within him as the sting of losing the wager resurfaced. This fragile human body felt like a cage, a prison that restrained his true nature. Slowly raising his hand, he summoned his mana. A calm blue aura responded instantly, glowing softly in the dim room. At the very least, the battle had strengthened him. His mana reserves had grown. As he expanded the flow, energy moved smoothly through his body, filling the room with a gentle pressure. He sensed it clearly. He had drawn one step closer to his true self. Satisfied, Adrian silently praised his own achievement. Even bound by a weak vessel, he had managed to invoke the ancient will. It was no small feat. Repeating the mantra etched into his soul, he reaffirmed that he had died 1,000 deaths and been reborn 100 times. Such was the immortal essence of his warrior spirit. A faint smile crossed his lips. The risk had been worth it. The calculated gamble had yielded tangible rewards. Nearby, Balerhard observed him quietly, his expression heavy with thought. The Count studied his nephew with grave seriousness, reassessing the depth of Adrian's potential. Soon after, a maid entered the room bearing urgent news, her composure wavering under Balerhard's presence. Moments later, the king and queen arrived, drawn by concern for their son's sudden collapse. Adrian greeted them respectfully from the bed, masking the lingering fatigue gnawing at his body. Only then did he notice that Balerhard had vanished without a trace, disappearing the moment the royal couple arrived. Adrian lay back down, surrendering to exhaustion and shutting out the room entirely. His body demanded rest, absolute rest. Turning his gaze to his hand, he noticed the scar left behind by the clash. It was a humiliating reminder of his defeat. Etched into his flesh, worry crept into his thoughts. If he did not rest now, the cost would be severe. His spirit stood at risk. Reality and memory were already beginning to blur, threatening to fracture his mind into chaos. The fear of madness loomed, the terror of being trapped reliving endless battles from past lives. Grumbling softly, he acknowledged that he had once again been dragged too deeply into the sword's memories. His thoughts wandered to Aiden's. Even imagining that woman sent a chill through him. She had been a truly exceptional swordswoman, revered by all. Speaking inwardly to Adelia, he revealed the truth, that she was a direct descendant of that legendary warrior. The realization carried weight. The potential in her bloodline was immense, though she still had a long path ahead to reach such heights. He wondered what future she envisioned for herself after mastering the sword. Faced with such a question, her uncertainty was understandable. The idea of becoming a knight felt unreal to her, almost unattainable. Rather than pressing further, Adrian resolved that such decisions could wait. What mattered now was resolve. In a moment of clarity, Adelia declared her unwavering devotion, pledging herself as his blade. In that instant, Adrian grasped the true meaning behind justice antorum, not law, but chosen loyalty. The distant blare of trumpets echoed in his mind, signaling the advance of armies. Battles ended, hymns of victory followed, and history marched forward, reflecting deeply. Adrian wondered how his own legend would one day be written. Adelia's oath carried weight beyond words. Her devotion transcended time, resonating through future generations. Stories once born gained lives of their own, crossing eras, even dimensions. Golden light suddenly flooded the room, pure and divine. It carried the prayers of the desperate, the wishes of those facing inevitable ends. Faith condensed into tangible power, descending upon the world itself. Accepting the vow, Adrian received her devotion fully. A system window manifested, confirming the oath and establishing a shared flow of power. The details of her story intertwined with his own, their destinies now bound. He accepted her loyalty with genuine gratitude, smiling warmly at his newly sworn knight. Overwhelmed, Adelia stood speechless, stunned by his sincerity. Adrian knew without doubt that one day, she too would forge a sacred legend of her own. 2 days later, sunlight bathed the royal castle, heralding the beginning of a new journey. Traveling in silence, Adrian observed the passing landscape while Adelia accompanied him. Tension thick between them, she avoided his gaze, weighed down by the gravity of her oath. Their path was interrupted by Elizabeth, the fourth queen, who appeared unexpectedly. Adrian greeted her coldly. She reminded him that her forgiveness toward the maid had been granted solely out of respect for his royal blood. Adrian calmly dismissed the notion, making it clear that forgiveness was not hers to give. She warned him that Balerhard would not allow his own name to be sullied on Adrian's behalf. Internally, Adrian dismissed the need for any shield. He had never relied on one. Offended, Elizabeth branded him arrogant. Adrian, unmoved, showed no interest in protection of any kind. Recalling the duel, he understood that he had wounded his uncle's pride by rejecting his beliefs. That pain would not fade easily. The demon of the heart planted within Balerhard was likely growing. Elizabeth spoke of the Count's legacy, 4 decades spent protecting the people, a reputation beyond reproach. His loyalty to the crown had never wavered. He had never sought power for himself. At last, she revealed the truth. During Adrian's confinement, Balerhard had volunteered to watch over him. No one else had wanted that burden. The revelation left Adrian unsettled. He struggled to comprehend what could have driven his uncle to make such a choice. The answer remained elusive, and the doubt lingered. The sudden appearance of the old scholar Niccolo marked the beginning of what promised to be an exhausting period of study. His stern gaze alone suggested relentless discipline. Idrison rejected the idea immediately, making it clear that he had no intention of wasting time on books when more important matters demanded his attention. Niccolo remained unmoved, calmly positioning himself beside Adelia in the hall. He showed no reaction to the prince's refusal. Idrison's stubbornness failed to leave any impression on him. Growing increasingly irritated, Idrison questioned the need for study when royal status already placed him above such concerns. The scholar responded with unflinching severity, reducing ignorance to the level of instinct. Offended, Idrison bristled at the implication, his temper flaring as Niccolo coolly observed that his reaction resembled that of a provoked beast. Anger rose further as Idrison insisted that he had not even begun to demonstrate his true eloquence. The confrontation escalated rapidly. Idrison asserted that he already possessed all the knowledge he required and saw no justification for continuing lessons of any kind. Accepting the claim without resistance, Niccolo proposed a simple resolution. If Idrison's confidence proved genuine, the scholar would never return. To settle the matter, Niccolo selected a test of intellect rather than strength, choosing the theory of mana as the subject. Idrison accepted instantly, his confidence unwavering. As the lesson began, Niccolo emphasized vigilance and awareness, explaining that lowering one's guard invited others to exploit weakness. Handing Idrison a book, Niccolo guided the discussion toward matters of politics and loyalty. Idrison analyzed the text, which described the bond between ruler and vassal as a cold, contractual exchange of mutual interests. From there, the conversation expanded into broader questions regarding the true relationship between a king and his people. What followed surprised even Idrison. He argued that a ruler's duty lay in protection, while the people repaid that service through taxes and obedience. Loyalty, in his view, was merely the price paid for stability. Hours passed unnoticed as the debate deepened, flowing naturally as daylight faded into night. When the lesson finally ended, Niccolo appeared quietly satisfied with the progress made. Idrison laughed afterward, amused by the unexpected turn of events. He had never imagined that such a lesson could hold his interest. Only later did he realize that it had been nothing more than an ordinary lecture, yet one he had strangely enjoyed. With a tired sigh, Idrison acknowledged the scholar's cunning. Niccolo had kept him engaged without force or coercion. Walking alone through the corridors, Niccolo reflected on the encounter, concluding that the first prince differed greatly from the rumors surrounding him. Beneath the troublesome exterior, he sensed a rare and overlooked potential. Smiling faintly, the old scholar felt satisfied with his discovery, convinced that the difficult student before him might become something extraordinary. Later that night, Idrison lay in bed staring at the ceiling, boredom weighing heavily on his thoughts. The silence of the room made him restless. Palace life was becoming unbearably monotonous. Adelia entered and noticed his frustration immediately, her concern evident as she checked on his condition. Idrison stretched lazily, complaining about how slowly winter seemed to approach. Shortly after, a maid announced that Sir Gallinard had arrived and was waiting outside. Allowing him to enter, Idrison wondered how to break the dull routine that had settled over him. Gallinard remarked on how long it had been since their last training session. As Idrison studied him, he noticed the knight's troubled demeanor. Gallinard entered slowly, his posture heavy, as though burdened by unseen weight. The shadow of inner demons still lingered around him. With his head bowed, Gallinard offered an apology, his voice trembling. Idrison was genuinely surprised. Having not expected such a gesture, Gallinard explained that he had broken a promise he once made to himself, admitting that he had avoided Idrison out of fear of confronting his own darkness. Idrison recalled Elizabeth's earlier warning not to place blind trust in the knights around him. Curious about Gallinard's intentions, he asked what the man now sought. Gallinard pledged his loyalty, stating that if Idrison truly considered him a student, he would follow him without hesitation. Idrison reflected carefully before responding. Rather than offering immediate acceptance, he decided to state his own wish first. Calling for his uncle Balerhard, he proposed that they travel together. With his confinement over, there was nothing preventing their departure. Idrison requested a destination far from the capital, suggesting a longer journey. Balerhard listened in silence, studying him closely as he attempted to understand the motivation behind such a request. He explained that organizing the necessary escort and schedule would take time. Idrison agreed without complaint, asking only to be informed when preparations were complete. At that moment, Kars entered the room, interrupting the conversation with evident curiosity. Noticing the way Idrison looked at him, Kars questioned the reason. He admitted his surprise, having expected a far more reckless demand. Reflecting inwardly, Idrison acknowledged that Balerhard had truly failed him in the past. Seeing the quiet suffering of the stubborn old man, Idrison chose, for now, to forgive him. When Kars laughed at the situation, Idrison questioned the amusement at another's misfortune. Before the moment could settle, Adelia rushed in carrying an important letter. She announced that the long-awaited message had finally arrived. Breaking the red seal, Idrison read the contents and found the answer he had been seeking. The letter confirmed that the invisible sword had accepted his invitation. Imagining the warrior known as the Blue Moon, Idrison recognized how valuable such an ally would be to his plans. Smiling in satisfaction, he folded the letter away, confident that events were unfolding favorably. Days later, the royal procession departed the capital. beginning the journey toward their destination. Growing impatient along the way, Idrison leaned out to ask how much longer the trip would last. Balerhard calmly informed him that they were already nearing their goal. As the landscape opened before them, the buildings of a famous village came into view. Bearing its distinctive crest, the Allen colony stood proud as the kingdom's finest forge. Blacksmiths hammered steel tirelessly, crafting weapons of war renowned throughout the land. Idrison explained that he sought a very specific craftsman, one who had once worked for the crown. Memories surfaced of an eccentric man with a peculiar temperament. Even recalling him sent a chill down Idrison's spine. Demanding excellence, Idrison emphasized that he required a weapon capable of enduring his full power. Balerhard warned that the blacksmith in question was notoriously difficult to deal with. Idrison dismissed the concern, confident that no serious issues would arise. As the map unfolded, the narrator marked the beginning of a new phase. The 30-day journey had only just begun. As the journey continued, 5 more days passed with the procession steadily advancing along the road. Idrison grew increasingly restless, the confinement of the carriage feeling like a slow and deliberate form of torture. From time to time, he glanced toward Adelia, who sat quietly in the corner, still and composed, resembling a lifeless doll. Letting his gaze drift toward the passing scenery, Idrison reflected on the time that had slipped by. Nearly a full month had passed since his return. Seeking to make use of the idle hours, he chose to focus inward, entering a state of meditation to refine and cultivate his growing power. As he settled, faint blue motes of mana began to swirl around his body. Drawing everything inward, he absorbed the energy of the royal moon directly into his core. The flow accelerated rapidly, forming a powerful vortex within his chest. When he opened his eyes, he witnessed the physical manifestation of his mana floating before him. Staring at the shape in disbelief, he questioned whether what he was seeing was real. The speed of his advancement was absurd. Shocked, he struggled to understand how he had already reached the 4th circle. The answer quickly revealed itself as the dormant energy of the Dragon Slayer sword reacted violently within him. That ancient force pushed relentlessly against his limits, forcibly expanding them. Pain surged through his veins as the power settled, a burning sensation threatening to overwhelm him. Enduring it, he felt the invisible chains that had once restricted his growth shatter completely. The seal that had held him back dissolved, granting him the freedom to evolve without obstruction. The ease of the breakthrough left him stunned. Adelia soon noticed the disturbance and called out in concern. Idrison quickly concealed the change, stretching casually and brushing it off as muscle tension. Smiling faintly, he clenched his fist, feeling the newly acquired strength pulsing steadily through his body. Before long, the carriage came to a halt before the imposing Allen residence. Stepping down, Idrison acknowledged the honor of visiting such a renowned forging site. Torden of the Allen Forges greeted him respectfully and ushered the group inside the expansive mansion. As they moved through the halls, Idrison observed countless weapons displayed along the walls like trophies. Examining them with a critical eye, he dismissed them as little more than ornamental pieces. Continuing through the corridors, he noted the Allen family's warm hospitality. When the topic of the requested sword arose, Torden confirmed it was already prepared. Idrison showed little interest, instead asking to explore the premises first. Accepting without hesitation, Torden guided him toward the legendary Allen Forge. Descending the stairs, the heat intensified with every step, accompanied by the relentless clang of hammer against metal. Torden spoke with pride, explaining that the forge never rested. Idrison remarked on the oppressive temperature, likening the place to a massive furnace. The host responded by praising the dedication of the blacksmiths. Suddenly, an eruption of flame burst from one of the forges deeper within. Orders were shouted as a commanding voice rang through the chaos. Idrison felt an unfamiliar presence emanating from that direction. Something distinctly different. Attempting to redirect him, Torden tried to draw his attention elsewhere, but Idrison ignored the effort and moved toward the heat and noise. There, an elderly blacksmith worked furiously, hammering incandescent metal without pause. The moment Idrison sensed the man's aura, he knew he had found exactly who he was searching for. Each strike of the hammer resonated clearly, forming a rhythm that felt strangely familiar. Drawn closer, Idrison felt captivated by the flawless harmony of the blows. The blacksmith appeared oblivious to everything beyond the blade in his hands. In that moment, Idrison's mind drifted, and he caught a fleeting glimpse of his first memory as a sword. He recalled his own creation, forged within roaring flames. The intense heat caused sweat to pour down his face, until Adelia stepped forward, gently wiping it away. Startled from his trance, Idrison looked at her in brief surprise before turning his attention back to the craftsman. Torden explained that the man was one of their most skilled blacksmiths. Watching from a distance, Idrison noticed how the old man poured his very soul into each strike. The rhythm never faltered. Suddenly, an enraged supervisor stormed forward, demanding the work cease. Torden identified him as the one overseeing that section of the forge. The command went ignored. The blacksmith continued hammering as if deaf to the world. Enraged, the supervisor charged forward, attempting to forcibly stop the process. Idrison intervened instantly, gripping the man's arm and halting him before he could interfere. Radiating authority, Idrison demanded silence and ordered everyone to clear the area. Turning his attention to the blade, he observed its hypnotic gleam. He noticed the blacksmith pushing himself far beyond physical limits. Sensing the danger, Idrison warned that the iron was cooling and urged the fire to be stoked immediately. The assistants reacted in panic, rushing to fuel the flames and restore the forge's intensity. Folding his arms, Idrison decided to observe silently, curious to see how far the blacksmith's resolve would carry him. Sweat and blood mingled as the old man continued, entering a trance-like state. The echoing rhythm of steel being shaped filled the forge, dominating the space with raw force. Idrison admired the technique, realizing that something extraordinary lay within the craftsman's hands. Suddenly he felt it, a strange resonance emanating from the unfinished blade. The heat intensified as the blacksmith's aura flared, merging with the flames themselves. Without pausing even to breathe, the man continued his work. Immersed in the moment, Idrison felt a deep, inexplicable connection to the scene before him. Questioning the sensation, he wondered what that vibrant, unfamiliar energy truly was. While strolling through the garden paths, Torren explained that the elderly blacksmith's behavior had become increasingly troubling. In recent weeks, the master had taken to melting down every sword he forged. When the reason was questioned, Torren clarified that the weapons themselves were flawless. Each creation was a complete masterpiece, free of defects. That was precisely what made the situation so painful. No one could understand why such perfection was being deliberately destroyed. The waste weighed heavily on Torren, especially given the blacksmith's declining condition. For nearly a month, the old man had barely eaten or slept, devoting himself entirely to the forge. Listening carefully, Idrison found his curiosity growing even stronger. There was something deeply unsettling, yet fascinating, about a craftsman willing to sacrifice everything for his work. As the days passed, Idrison began visiting the forge daily. He observed in silence as the master repeated the same punishing routine from dawn until nightfall. The relentless cycle revealed not madness, but obsession, a level of dedication bordering on self-destruction. Even as darkness fell, the forge remained ablaze, lit by fire and echoing with the steady rhythm of hammer strikes. Eventually, the day of departure arrived. The procession prepared to leave the Allen colony. Before departing, Idrison visited the forge one last time, hoping to witness the completion of the blade. Watching the ongoing work, he felt a quiet regret. The sword remained unfinished, and he knew he could no longer delay the return journey. Accepting the inevitability of departure, he turned away, deciding to rest in preparation for the next morning. Torren, deeply disappointed, wished that Idrison could have seen the finished masterpiece. The regret lingered heavily in the air. Suddenly, urgency cut through the moment. A servant rushed forward with astonishing news. The blacksmith had completed the sword. Shock widened Idrison's eyes as he turned back toward the forge. From the shadows, the old craftsman emerged, holding a radiant blade. The metal gleamed brilliantly, reflecting sunlight so intensely it dazzled everyone present. With reverent care, the blacksmith polished the weapon as if tending to a child. Kneeling, he presented the sword, offering his greatest creation solely to the young prince. When Idrison accepted it, the balance felt flawless. The blade seemed alive in his grip, pulsing faintly with power. Those watching stood frozen in disbelief, unable to comprehend that the old man had willingly given up such a treasure. Idrison immediately recognized its worth. This was a weapon fit for royalty. Testing it, he felt energy flow seamlessly from the blade into his arm. The sword moved as though it were an extension of his own will. When raised skyward, it shone with overwhelming brilliance, reflecting the authority of its new master. Idrison chose a name for the weapon, Dawn. To him, it symbolized a beginning. To those who would stand against him, it would mark the end. The name pleased the blacksmith deeply, and joy lit his weary face. That joy did not last long. The strain of countless sleepless days finally claimed the old man's body, and he collapsed. Idrisen caught him before he struck the stone ground. Carrying the frail craftsman, Idrisen informed Balorhart that their departure would be delayed once more. He chose to remain for the night, to tend to the man who had given everything for his art. As night settled over the village, knights guarded the entrance. Inside, the blacksmith slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. Watching him rest, Idrisen reflected on fate. The sword had chosen its moment to be born. Leaning closer, Idrisen whispered a truth meant only for the craftsman's ears. The old man awoke in shock, trembling as realization dawned upon him. Understanding at last, he recognized why such a powerful connection had guided his hands. Relief washed over him, followed by quiet laughter. Everything finally made sense. With a trembling hand, the blacksmith reached out to touch the sword once more. Idrisen placed the hilt into those worn palms. Holding it, the craftsman caressed the cold steel with unmistakable pride. In his final request, he wished for the blade to grow as great as its wielder, hoping it would accompany Idrisen's legend forever. Idrisen accepted the vow, promising that the weapon would become a living legend. Satisfied, the old man smiled softly, his grip loosening as he slipped into peaceful rest. His breathing faded, and his final breath left the room in silence. Idrisen stood quietly, honoring the master's passing. The blacksmith had delivered his ultimate creation, and now rested at last. Torches crackled gently, illuminating the chamber as the moment passed with solemn dignity. Dawn was sheathed in red velvet, its first resting place worthy of its birth. Torin expressed deep gratitude, calling it an honor to offer such a gift to the royal family. He hoped the blade would protect the prince's life. Holding the sword once more, Idrisen felt its perfect balance and acknowledged its immeasurable value. Torin, visibly nervous, struggled to hide his unease under the weight of royal recognition. Idrisen praised the Allen family's loyalty, noting their unwavering service to the crown. Torin realized then that the prince understood far more than he ever revealed. Soon after, the royal procession resumed its journey. The soldiers moved swiftly, eager to recover lost time. Finding Balorhart amidst the marching ranks, Idrisen observed his uncle directing the troops with precision. The urgency was clear. Orders had come down. They were required to reach Stone Lion Castle before nightfall. Idrisen then admitted a rather serious problem. He had no idea how to ride a horse. Balorhart was left utterly speechless by that revelation. Struggling to mount the horse, Idrisen nearly lost his balance several times before finally settling into the saddle. Even then, staying upright proved difficult. His awkward attempts drew laughter from Adelia, who moved alongside him and tried to help as he clung to the reins like an uncoordinated child. The stubborn animal resisted his control, forcing him to fight for balance the entire ride as the procession advanced along the road. Eventually, the silhouette of Stone Lion Fortress emerged on the horizon. The massive structure rose proudly beneath the open sky, its towering walls dominating the landscape. Upon arrival at the gates, Idrisen dismounted with visible relief, grateful to have survived the journey without humiliating himself further. The welcome was led by York of the Willowin family, who formally received the crown prince. Soldiers bowed in unison, saluting the arrival of royalty. As Idrisen observed them, he immediately recognized the Iron Lion family's strength. The crest they bore marked them as guardians of the northern border, warriors shaped by generations of battle. His thoughts drifted to their origins, recalling the founder of that lineage, Arwen. The memory stirred a quiet ache of nostalgia as he recalled his former companion. As Arwen knelt before him, her presence carried an unmistakable edge. Adelia sensed hostility beneath the surface and instantly released a killing intent meant to shield her master. Her glare locked onto Arwen, perceiving the threat hidden within polite restraint. Idrisen placed a hand on Adelia's shoulder, stopping her before violence erupted. At his command, she withdrew her aura, though her eyes never left the perceived rival. He breathed out slowly, relieved that her mana heart training allowed her to regain control so quickly. Calling for Arwen, Idrisen asked her to accompany him inside the fortress. He then invited the other knights to follow, his smile carrying provocation. The challenge was clear. Unfinished business still lingered from the past, and it would be better if everyone involved were present. Taking up a wooden sword, Idrisen announced his desire to see the famed strength of the Iron Lion firsthand. Facing the assembled soldiers, he awaited the first to step forward. The knights hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances. Their reluctance amused him, and he openly mocked their fear while guaranteeing that no punishment would follow the outcome. At last, one knight stepped out, Francis of the 4th Troop. He advanced confidently, eager to test himself. Idrison accepted without ceremony. Francis charged with force, but his movements were slow and predictable. Idrison evaded effortlessly and responded with a single mon-infused strike to the knight's abdomen. The blow drove the air from Francis's lungs and sent him crashing to the ground, defeated instantly. Without pause, Idrison called for another challenger. Paul of the 5th Troop emerged, attacking aggressively in an attempt to reclaim his comrade's honor. His effort ended just as quickly. Idrison blocked with ease and struck him across the face with the wooden sword, sending him flying through the air like a discarded doll. Another knight fell soon after, brought down with brutal precision. The courtyard filled with fallen bodies. Idrison surveyed the scene with disappointment, lamenting the weakness of the famed Iron Lion troops. The soldiers muttered among themselves, acknowledging that they had simply been unable to react fast enough. Turning his attention to Arwen, who had observed everything in silence, Idrison declared his intention to take her with him when he returned to the capital. Her hesitation was immediate. Before she could respond, the Iron Lion's commander stepped forward to intervene, refusing to surrender his strongest warrior so easily. Idrison mocked the resistance, stating that the matter could be settled simply. He proposed a wager to decide Arwen's fate. The commander rejected the idea, refusing to treat her as a prize. Idrison pressed further, questioning whether the man feared defeat. Provoked, the commander accepted the duel, declaring that if he won, Idrison would abandon the demand. In response, Idrison raised the stakes to an absurd degree. Should he lose, he would surrender Dawn itself. The courtyard fell silent in shock. Arwen tried to intervene, unwilling to see something so precious risked for her sake. A soldier voiced what everyone understood. A sword of that caliber was worth more than an entire castle. Accepting the challenge, Commander Ellas of the Neverland family drew his blade, formally declaring his intent to fight for the honor of his troops. He revealed the Black Fang sword, an heirloom passed down through generations. Idrison laughed at the man's confidence and finally unsheathed Dawn, allowing its brilliance to flood the courtyard. The irony was not lost on him, one master-crafted blade facing another. He revealed that Dawn was the 100th creation of the same legendary craftsman. Tension rippled through the commander as he realized the truth. His heirloom was inferior. Blue lightning like mana surged around Idrison's body, enveloping him in a crackling aura. He made it clear that restraint would not exist in this fight. His path, even if deemed wrong by others, was still a path he chose. He dismissed the shallow convictions of those who walked borrowed roads, explaining that such places had never been home to him. As Adelia watched, she felt the weight of his words and the respect embedded within them. Idrison declared that if a path belonged to his people, that alone made it worth walking. Calling her attention, he instructed her to watch closely. Behind him, blue flames roared to life, forming a blazing trail that burned with purpose. This, he revealed, was the path she would now follow. Within those flames, Adelia glimpsed the image of Agnons. Understanding the lesson, she accepted it without hesitation, vowing to pursue that trail of light regardless of cost. As her resolve solidified, her golden aura resonated in harmony with her master's power. Back in the capital, Bale reported to the king that the prince's holiday had ended far sooner than planned. Calmly sipping tea, the king listened as Bale described their arrival at Iron Lion Castle and the unexpected developments that followed. Bale remarked that the situation had surprised everyone involved and warned that the other princes had begun making their own moves. The balance of power within the royal family, he explained, was already shifting. His thoughts drifted to a royal banquet held 6 years earlier. Questioned about his role as the boy's guardian, Bale reflected that he had merely honored a unique request made by an old friend. He recalled the second prince that night, drunk beyond reason, sprawled arrogantly upon the throne while mocking his elder brother. The overweight prince had ridiculed the first prince publicly, provoking outrage, losing all restraint. The drunken fool had drawn a sword and attacked his own blood. Bale remembered him as a pathetic and hopeless ruffian. That banquet, he explained, had been steeped in rot. Letters and schemes had circulated freely, while poisons were served as casually as wine. Bale had intervened before tragedy struck, incinerating the crude toxin with his own blue mana. In doing so, he had burned away what little family affection still remained. Yet now, he admitted, the spoiled prince was no longer the same. With each passing day, the boy continued to evolve. Bale concluded that the so-called madness had never truly existed. Holding his cup, he noted that the child the prince had become bore no resemblance to the others. He pleaded for the king to give the troublesome nephew a chance. The king quietly wondered whether it was Bale or the prince who had truly changed. The calm was shattered when a soldier burst in, urgently calling for Lord Willowen. The messenger delivered alarming news regarding the first prince. Outside, the fortress courtyard roared with activity as the duel continued. York observed the chaos, remarking that something extraordinary was unfolding. Bale corrected him coldly, warning that the danger did not concern the prince, but rather the knights foolish enough to stand against him. York questioned whether the boy truly possessed such overwhelming strength. The answer came immediately, as soldiers were sent flying through the air. Another knight was struck down effortlessly, as though made of straw. Duncan screamed in pain as he rolled across the ground after taking a devastating blow. The onlookers watched in disbelief as the prince claimed yet another victory. Bale, unsurprised, simply confirmed that he had warned them this would happen. Wiping sweat from his face, the prince smiled faintly, sensing the resistance beginning to fracture. He continued calling for challengers, forcing more soldiers to test themselves against his blade. Remembering his uncle's words, he recalled that a royal knight was born upon reaching the second ring. What once sounded like exaggeration now proved undeniably true. He moved with inhuman precision, dodging attacks effortlessly. His body screamed in protest as he pushed against its limits, the weight of the true dragon's energy crushing his muscles. Ignoring the pain, he focused entirely on battle, on the intoxicating flow of power within him. The noise of the world faded until only he and his opponent remained. An incoming strike slowed in his perception. His mind raced faster than his body could respond. The sensation dragged him back to memories of a former life, where combat had once defined his existence. His eyes burned with intense blue flame as he narrowly evaded the blade by a fraction of an inch. He retaliated with overwhelming force, unleashing a shockwave that hurled his opponent away. Breathing heavily, exhaustion began to seep into his limbs. Still, he demanded another challenger. Blocking a heavy blow with his battered wooden sword, he remained utterly focused. He spun and countered fluidly, blue mana coating his movements. Though the impact rattled his body, he refused to retreat, using the force to drive his enemy back violently. His strikes cut through the air faster than the eye could follow. Dodging on instinct alone, he avoided fatal blows by razor-thin margins. His cold gaze alone was enough to shake his opponents. At last, leaning on his sword, he drew deep breaths, surrounded by fallen bodies. Standing alone at the center of the courtyard, he resembled an unchallenged victor. Despite his fatigue, he smiled faintly, knowing he had earned their respect. Shouts erupted as soldiers announced that he had won 70 consecutive battles. Suddenly, blue light exploded around him. His aura surged violently as his mana condensed and erupted, propelling him into the fourth ring with a thunderous release of power. The pressure flooded the courtyard, forcing everyone to their limits. As the glow intensified, he realized his body was finally adapting to the magic. The moment passed, and exhaustion struck without mercy. His legs buckled, sending him to his knees as the world spun. Commander Ellis rushed forward, catching him before he collapsed completely. Regaining his breath, the prince confirmed he was merely exhausted. Ellis praised his strength openly, admitting he had never witnessed combat like that before. The knights gazed upon him with respect and admiration, slowly rising with the commander's support. The prince expressed his gratitude and weakly questioned whether his point had been proven. Ellis agreed without hesitation, acknowledging that the prince had exceeded all expectations. Looking around the courtyard, the prince understood that he had gained more than victory. He had secured their loyalty. Reality settled in as he recognized he had overexerted himself and would suffer for it later. Reflecting quietly, he realized that the spirit of knights never truly changed. Strength was respected, and honor demanded that both victory and defeat be accepted with equal dignity. With preparations complete, the procession arranged the carriages for departure from the fortress. Idrison offered his farewells, expressing hope that their paths would cross again soon. He wished the Count, the Baron, and the others well, urging them to take care until their next meeting. Before leaving, he called the Baron aside to request one final favor. He asked that everything which had occurred during his stay remain strictly confidential. The Baron questioned the reasoning, believing such power should be revealed for the benefit of humanity. Idrison, however, revealed his intent with a playful edge. Admitting that secrecy suited his plans, because he wished to surprise a particular individual. As evening approached, the group made camp in the forest beneath a vivid sunset. Carr volunteered to patrol the surroundings and ensure the area remained secure. From a distance, Arwen observed Idrison quietly, her gaze lingering as though she wished to speak. She noted how unnaturally quickly he had adapted to life in the wild. Idrison, yawning, admitted his exhaustion, surprised that he had endured as long as he had. Inside the tent, Adelia requested permission to speak privately with her master. Idrison suggested she rest in the carriage, where it would be more comfortable, but she refused, insisting on staying close in case he needed assistance. Throwing himself onto the bed, Idrison felt every muscle protest as fatigue finally caught up to him. Reflecting on the day, he realized the Order of the Iron Lion was far weaker than expected. Even their authority figures failed to surpass true sword experts. Most knights had barely reached swordmaster rank, a level that once required immense struggle to attain. He silently criticized Balorhard and others of that generation for wasting their extraordinary potential. The talent existed, yet fear or complacency had prevented them from fully cultivating it. He understood that this era flowed differently from his past life. Determined not to repeat old mistakes, he resolved to rebuild himself properly, even if it meant starting from nothing. His fist clenched with renewed resolve. His thoughts were interrupted when Balorhard entered the tent and asked whether he intended to sleep already. Idrison encouraged his uncle, reminding him that it was never too late to pursue one's ambitions. Balorhard praised his nephew's achievements, noting that he had already won the loyalty of the Iron Lion. Comparing him to the other princes, he remarked that none of them would ever act with such freedom or conviction. The sudden shift in tone unsettled Idrison, who wondered what had come over his uncle. Balorhard clarified that he was not referring to the wager involving the other princes, but to their earlier agreement. The condition had been the defeat of a double-chain knight, a condition Idrison had already fulfilled when he effortlessly overcame Francis. Acknowledging this, Balorhard solemnly honored the promise he had made at that decisive moment. He pledged his loyalty to Idrison as his rightful lord, swearing to serve him as a faithful vassal. He committed the full strength of the Third Legion to his cause. Idrison reacted in panic, insisting that he had never asked for such devotion. He reminded his uncle that he had only requested trust, not allegiance, and firmly rejected any implication that he sought the cursed throne. Upon returning, the castle welcomed him with a commotion befitting a king's arrival. Idrison quickly found himself surrounded by maids and attendants. Overwhelmed by the chaos, annoyed, he demanded that everyone leave him alone and clear the area. From afar, the guards watched with amusement, finding the prince's irritation oddly endearing. At last, he enjoyed a rare moment of silence within his chamber. That peace shattered when the third prince burst in unannounced, loudly announcing his return and mocking Idrison's absence. He accused his brother of secretly gathering forces and swore revenge for what he believed was betrayal. Idrison, exhausted, dismissed the accusations, stating once again that he had no interest in power or succession, knowing full well that no one would believe him now. Calling Balorhard back, Idrison asked him to abandon the formalities. His uncle instead spoke of honor, reminding him that House Balhard stood as the shield defending the kingdom from the northern monsters. If Idrison chose to act as a king, that shield would move for him. He warned that conflict was inevitable and vowed that no one would be allowed to harm his nephew. Leaving the room, Balorhard urged Idrison to remember his words. Left alone, Idrison reflected on the burden of being the first prince. Weariness settled over him as he wished for a brief stretch of peace. His goal remained unchanged: eliminate the looming threat quickly so he could finally rest. To do so, he would need strength overwhelming enough to crush any opponent. Later, the grand hall blazed with light as chandeliers illuminated a gathering of nobles assembled for the banquet. King Lionel Liomer entered with commanding presence. Drawing all attention, shortly after, the herald announced the arrival of the first prince, Idrison Liomer. As he stepped inside, he felt countless eyes upon him, curious, envious, calculating. The other princes and influential figures revealed themselves among the crowd. Meeting his father's gaze across the hall, Idrison exchanged a silent, meaningful look with the king seated upon the throne. As Idrian descended the stairs alongside San, the crowd below erupted into cheers, loudly celebrating his name. Among them, a noblewoman caught sight of Idrian and reacted with shy excitement, overwhelmed by how incredible he looked. To her, his dignified presence resembled the majesty of a king in his youth. watching their exaggerated reactions. Adrian felt nothing but irritation. In his mind, he dismissed the spectacle as absurd, wondering why they were making such a fuss over him, merely losing some weight. To him, the so-called nobles of the realm looked more like a bad joke than people worthy of respect. As he continued observing them, something more unsettling revealed itself. Every single one of them bore the same trait. Snake heart. Adrian immediately recognized it as the mark of malignant karma, accumulated by those who steal from others and trample over countless lives. The realization disgusted him, especially knowing that all of them carried something so vile beneath their polished appearances. Amidst the sea of corrupt nobles, only one person stood out as worth acknowledging. His brother Taylor was different, honest by nature and incapable of betraying him. Taylor remained untouched by that repulsive stain. When Adrian's gaze met his brother's, Taylor responded with a warm, genuine smile, grounding Adrian in the middle of all that hypocrisy. A man stepped forward and addressed Adrian with a polite smile, expressing amazement at how magnificently His Highness had grown. Adrian did not bother acknowledging him. Instead, with a bright and genuine smile, he called out to Taylor, noting that since Taylor had already arrived, he should have come forward to greet him. Caught off guard, Taylor froze in shock, momentarily flustered by being addressed so directly. He quickly recovered, then offered a gentle smile and apologized, explaining that he had only wished to thank Adrian for the invitation. Observing Taylor's reaction, Adrian reflected inwardly. He recognized people like him as those who might lack capability, but were free of corruption. In Adrian's mind, that alone made them sufficient. Such individuals were suitable vessels to hold the seeds he intended to sow from this point onward. Before the moment could continue, a guard's loud announcement cut through the hall, calling everyone to attention. The guard formally declared that the authority of the arriving figure had been legitimately recognized by His Majesty, the Emperor of the Empire of Burgundy. The name Gelmarx Montpellier of Burgundy was proclaimed with emphasis, followed by the announcement that Ambassador Cliang de Bourgogne-Montpellier was entering. As the doors were opened wide, the atmosphere shifted. Adrian stood stunned, his thoughts momentarily thrown into confusion as he struggled to grasp who this unexpected arrival could be. Moments later, the ambassador of the Empire of Burgundy, Cliang of Burgundy-Montpellier, entered the hall. At the sight of him, everyone present at the party bowed in unison, showing their respect. Burgundy then approached Adrian and greeted him with a relaxed smile, remarking that it had been a long time since they last met. The instant Adrian saw him, tension seized his body. In his thoughts, the name Burgundy echoed heavily. He recognized him as the nemesis that he and his companion had fought against for the longest time. 400 years ago. It was a name that had carved countless scars into this country, and the fact that this man now stood before thousands filled Adrian with restrained fury. As these thoughts raced through his mind, chaos struck without warning. A man accidentally spilled his wine onto Adrian. Panic overtook him as he immediately apologized, anxiously asking whether Adrian was unharmed. He hurriedly explained that he had been rushing to greet Adrian and had made a terrible mistake. Repeatedly begging for forgiveness, Adrian fixed the man with a cold, angry stare. The lively hall fell completely silent. Breaking the tension, Adrian calmly turned away and stated that he would need to change his clothes. The elderly man bent deeply at the waist, apologizing once more. He blamed his aging body for failing him and admitted that he had committed a grave discourtesy. At that moment, Carl stepped forward and informed Adrian that he would escort him. Adrian then asked about the identity of the man who had caused the disturbance. Carls promptly clarified that the individual was His Excellency, the Marquis Bielefeld. Adrian wiped the wine from his mouth and clothes with a towel. A faint smile appeared on his face as he reflected on the name Bielefeld. In that moment, he acknowledged that not everyone was rotten, and thanks to that brief incident, his overheated mind had finally cooled down. The scene then shifted. Adrian stood alone, deeply unsettled as thoughts of Burgundy consumed him. Sweat poured down his body, revealing how shaken he truly was. Soon after, Balorhard arrived and mentioned that he had heard about the incident. He also pointed out that Adrian still had not eaten dinner. Adrian offered no response. Noticing his silence, Balorhard grew concerned and continued speaking. He relayed that Marquis Bielefeld had commented that Adrian looked as though he was about to cause trouble, and that the remark was far from meaningless. Adrian listened to all of this with a serious, unmoving expression. Balorhard then took a seat and pressed further. bluntly questioning what Adrian had been trying to do. Adrian responded calmly, stating that he was not that reckless. He explained that his reaction stemmed from pure confusion. He reflected on how the evil Bourgogne clan was flaunting its power in the very heart of the kingdom. He noted that the nobles showed Burgundy a level of sincere respect that they did not even offer to royalty. To him, the atmosphere was far too tense to be called peace, and the relationship far too one-sided to be considered an alliance. He could not comprehend how the country had fallen into such a state. As these thoughts settled, anger surged within Adrian, and his eyes widened with barely restrained rage. Balerhard explained that the past held nothing particularly special. The kingdom had once stood firm against countless invasions by the empire. Exceptional knights rose time and again to repel the empire's advances. However, as the years passed, the empire continued to grow, and the gap between them steadily widened. Eventually, when the empire rose as a true superpower, the kingdom was left with no option but to kneel. Hearing this, Adrian was left stunned. The words struck him like a bolt of thunder, crashing down on his head. In his thoughts, a realization began to form, tied to that single hidden cause he had long feared. Despite being a small country located on the outskirts of the continent, Lüneburg had once stood against the Empire of Bourgogne. The source of that strength had allowed them to oppose a mighty empire. From the very founding of the nation, flawless structures had been built upon ordinary, yet sometimes heroic tales. Those stories had grown into something extraordinary. They had become legends. Their achievements had even given birth to myths, true anthems of martial spirit. And yet all of it had been lost. At that moment, Adrian summoned a blue flame in his hand and declared to Balerhard, his uncle, that he had changed his mind. Balerhard reacted in shock and demanded to know what he meant. Placing a hand against his chest, Adrian spoke with unwavering confidence, declaring his intent to become king and stating that he would attempt it himself. Balerhard stood frozen in disbelief. Adrian allowed a faint smirk to form as his thoughts followed. He acknowledged that he might come to regret this decision. Even so, it was something he had to do. After all, he had practically built half of this country with his own hands. The scene shifted to the second day of the banquet. Early in the morning, as Adrian entered the hall, the guards made a formal announcement, declaring the arrival of His Highness, the first Prince Adrian Leonberg, followed by the entry of Lord Vale of northern Balerhard County. As Adrian cast his gaze across the room, everyone present lowered their heads in fear and submission. Watching their reaction, Adrian smiled with quiet pride. In his thoughts, he mocked the protocol, finding it cheap, and even worse than the way nobles were treated in other countries. His mind drifted to the past, when his friend had once stood before the people. No one believed he would ever become king. He had been nothing more than a simple country boy who fled from a remote rural corner. Even among those who were exploited and cast aside, he had not stood out in any remarkable way. And yet that boy had stepped forward before the people, just like Adrian was doing now. Standing tall, Adrian reflected on those who possessed eyes yet failed to see. Before a flock of sheep, he remained upright and unyielding. A confident smile spread across his face as a blue aura enveloped his body. At that moment, a system window appeared, announcing the activation of singing the king's anthem. The system immediately warned that his current skills could not fully handle the level of the anthem. As a result, parts of the anthem were omitted. Again and again, in the end only a single verse was sung, amounting to merely 1/4 of the full anthem. Suddenly, a sharp pain struck Adrian's chest, catching him off guard. As he endured it, he realized that compared to the true dragon-killing Chimno, the pain was not unbearable. That was because this anthem was only of hero grade, not myth grade. A new realization struck Adrian as he continued thinking. He understood that, even so, there could not have been a more appropriate anthem for the current situation. He stood motionless at the very center of the chamber. Blue energy coiled around him like living water, fluid and luminous, alive with power. It flowed up from the ground, wrapped around his legs and torso, and rose over his shoulders in slow, deliberate arcs above his head. The magic condensed into a crown of liquid light, hovering just above his hair and pulsing with quiet authority. His uniform appeared regal and precise, dark fabric edged with gold, crimson panels catching and reflecting the glow. The light shone in his sharp eyes as he pressed one hand to his chest, his fingers tense as he steadied the power surging within him. Witnessing this sight, everyone present was left in shock, and one by one, they bowed deeply before him. Adrian smirked with pride as a thought crossed his mind. Only now did they seem worth looking at. He then commanded the gathered nobles to lift their heads. At that very moment, Adrian suddenly sensed an overwhelmingly powerful presence. From within the hall, a woman stepped forward, her body releasing a fierce and vibrant purple aura filled with energy. She removed her cloak, revealing herself to be an elf. The sight left Adrian stunned, the realization striking him all at once. The elf woman smiled calmly, clearly surprised that someone still remembered the anthem. As Adrian looked at her more closely, his shock deepened. He understood that she was not merely an elf. That woman was something far beyond that. The instant Adrian grasped who she truly was, terror surged through him, chilling him to his core. People are told that elves are the most beautiful creation made by God. They are described as a benevolent race that would never needlessly harm even the smallest life. They are known as the gardeners of the forest, beings who live for 300 to 1,000 years. This is the image people picture when they hear the word elf. However, reality is very different. Elves are a cruel race that uses beauty as bait to destroy their opponents. Among them, the high elves born with the hero grade from birth are the most dangerous of all. As Adrian looks at the elf before him, he realizes she is not even a regular high elf. She has lived for nearly 1,000 years. She is an elder high elf. Her name is Sigrun, the dancing magic swordswoman. She is a member of the expedition that slaughtered the mad dragon 400 years ago. Adrian suddenly remembers what this elf once did to him in the past. Back when he was still a sword, even then she had shown an unsettling interest in him, suggesting she would take him with her if his master ever died. She had promised that he would never be bored for the rest of his life. She had even claimed that being a sword only made him more desirable in her eyes. Disturbed by the memory, Adrian recalls her as the lunatic who tormented him to a horrifying degree. He wonders if she would recognize him now. At the same time, he realizes that he has just recited the hymn of the Kingi, something she knows well. Sigrun studies him and senses familiarity. Asking if they have met before, Adrian denies it by shaking his head. Sigrun finds this strange, as he feels familiar to her for reasons she cannot explain. Adrian explains that this is the first time he has ever seen an elf with his own eyes. His words shock everyone present, including Sigrun herself. Despite this, Sigrun remains unconvinced and accuses him of lying. Adrian reflects that even 400 years ago, Sigrun was one of the strongest beings he encountered during his life as a sword. He knows there is no telling what kind of monster she has become now. Sigrun explains that when humans see an elf for the first time, they usually react in one of two ways. Most become completely captivated. Those who have reached a high level of martial understanding instead become wary and apprehensive. She presses a finger against Adrian's chest and observes that he does not appear to have reached such a level yet, despite his status. Adrian responds with a confident smirk, implying that his tastes are simply different. Sigrun says nothing further. Covering her face once again, Sigrun takes her leave, remarking that although their meeting was brief, it was a pleasure. Adrian feels relieved and believes he is safe for the moment. Soon after, Adrian is told to choose a consort for himself. Some of the princesses presented are far too young. Some are clearly afraid of him. Others appear openly angry. None of them appeal to Adrian. The prince's mother scolds him harshly, reminding him that this occasion is meant to choose a proper consort. She warns him not to expect these women to resemble those he usually associates with. She lists the qualities required of a future consort, emphasizing wisdom, benevolence, good health, and the backing of a respectable family. At that moment, Sigrun steps forward and bows before the queen, announcing that the elf delegation is requesting an audience. She introduces herself as Sigrun of the Mistletoe clan and offers her greetings to Queen Margarita. The queen remarks that it has been a very long time since elves last visited the kingdom and expresses her surprise. Sigrun observes that the queen appears to be searching for a woman to become the prince's spouse. She confirms this assumption herself, smiling as she states that she is a high elf. Adrian is left wondering what she is trying to do. Sigrun then claims that her age is coincidentally not far apart from Adrian's. Adrian is internally outraged, knowing they are separated by nearly 1,000 years, and is shocked by how shamelessly she lies without hesitation. Sigrun continues by stating that an eternally beautiful elf is often considered the ideal spouse for a human. She mentions that many follow her and remain by her side at all times, likening them to an order of knights by human standards. She concludes by saying that from the moment she first saw Adrian, she felt that their fates were intertwined. Hearing her words, Adrian was struck by a single thought. Elves never lied about their fate and their connections. If that was true, then everything she had just said must have been sincere. The queen watched Sigrun's boldness with visible amazement. Around them, the other guests murmured among themselves, recalling that elves were known to place immense importance on fate. Speculation quickly spread through the banquet hall about whether this encounter would lead to a marriage alliance with the elves. Before the whispers could settle, Idrian suddenly grabbed Sigrun's hand and led her away from the crowd. The abrupt action left the entire hall in shock. Away from prying ears, Sigrun smiled and calmly explained that she had only come to foster friendship between her clan and the kingdom. Idrian responded with a serious glare and demanded clarity. He addressed her by her full title, Elder High Elf Sigrun, revealing that he knew exactly who she was. She was an executioner who had handled her clan's dirty work for hundreds of years. She was known as the Blade of the Mistletoe clan. Idrian pressed further, asking whether she had truly come for an investigation or for the execution of a sentence. Sigrun's lips curved into a sly smile as she expressed her interest in how he had uncovered her identity. Idrian offered no answer. Instead, he felt the overwhelming surge of energy radiating from her body as a vibrant purple aura flared around her. At that moment, he realized she was likely a monster whose power he could not even begin to fathom. The fact that she had sensed a thread of fate connecting them meant her grade was high enough to glimpse the past etched into his soul. Sigrun pointed out that he had known she was an executioner, yet he remained silent, unaware of how foolish it was to do so in front of someone like her. Idrian answered with a faint smirk. He understood very well that it was just as foolish to run his mouth recklessly in front of an executioner. He then demanded an end to the games and warned her not to interfere with his fate. His words visibly shocked Sigrun. Internally, Idrian assessed the situation. For now, she only held mild curiosity toward him. If things remained as they were, the fate of a lowly human would be torn to shreds by a lunatic elf. It would be better to deepen her interest instead. He needed to become something worth preserving, a delicacy to be aged and savored, something too precious to taste once and discard. His strange composure and calculated words only made Sigrun more curious. She circled him slowly, examining him from every angle before asking who he truly was. Idrian replied that, at present, he was nothing more than a pitiful prince, abandoned even by his own father. If she wished to know more, she would simply have to wait and see. Sigrun's sly smile returned. She admitted that she had sensed something unusual from the start. She had wondered why she had been assigned such a trivial mission, one that seemed to lack rhyme or reason. Now she understood the purpose of her assignment. She had been sent there because of him. Idrian felt irritation rise within him. Whether 400 years ago or now, she remained an absolutely creepy woman. Without hesitation, he took her hand once more and led her back into the banquet hall. The crowd stared in stunned silence as they returned together. Then, before anyone could recover from their shock, Idrian publicly announced his engagement to Sigrun. As he spoke her name with forced affection, he reflected bitterly that he never imagined he would ever address her that way. For now, however, he could not go against Sigrun's interest, even if it was only to buy himself a little more time. He had no choice but to play along. He declared that such an important matter could not be decided hastily, and that he intended to take time to observe carefully. The queen immediately expressed approval, stating that an engagement with an elf would indeed be a great boon. Behind his calm expression, Idrian analyzed what this time truly meant. For the queen, it would be used to calculate the political and strategic value of the engagement. For Sigrun, it would be time for her so-called delicacy, him to age properly. And for Idrian himself, it would be time to build enough power to eventually escape that batshit crazy elf.